To our topic today, I need you to understand Ambia. Ambia are prophets, and the other similar term we use is Rusul, the singular Rasul, which means messengers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends revelation to communicate and guide mankind. Every message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wahi, revelation, has two aspects to it. The first is what we call the lafz, and the second is what we refer to as the ma'na. This introduction is very important. Pay extra attention. Wahi has two aspects to it. The first one was lafz, and the second one is ma'na. Lafz refers to the word, the letter, and the ma'na refers to the meaning behind that word and letter. If either of the two are lost, that message is no longer preserved because it's not actionable. In order for a statement to be practiced, to be brought into life, you need to know what the word was, and you also need to know what does it represent, what does it mean. This is a big debate even among legal scholars of our time, in our own constitution, that what's the meaning behind this word, this statement, this phrase, this clause, this amendment? What is the meaning behind it? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent revelation, with time, naturally, I say naturally because of the effects of shaitan and his unfortunate deception, people corrupt revelation. If it happens with love, if people corrupt the words, then by default the meaning is lost. The meaning can only exist if the love is preserved. So whenever the people corrupted the love, the word, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would now send a new message. So for that, a Rasul would come to deliver a new love. So the love can be revived and people have that message of Allah, therefore their anchor to guidance. But if the lafz was preserved, but corrupt scholarship and wild thinking, untamed thoughts, the nafs of the human being stepped in and corrupted the meaning, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Ambia to rectify the meaning. Therefore, you won't see multiple Rusul at the same time. You will find multiple Ambia at once though. You guys understand this? You won't find multiple Rusul in one region, in one place at one time. However, you will find multiple Ambia in one place because each one serves a task in helping the messenger in fulfilling the meaning and enacting the revelation. So they play a role. Harun alayhi salam helps Musa alayhi salam and so on. It's okay. Okay. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was the final messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the responsibility of preserving this revelation. So the love of the Quran was preserved by Muslims, I would say, in a miraculous way, that we memorize the Quran. The way the Muslims memorize the Quran is nothing short of a miracle. But in order to ensure that the meaning behind that love is also preserved and there will not be a need for another prophet afterwards, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did our ummah a favor that no other ummah before ever had or can ever imagine of. And that is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the preservation of Hadith too. So now, when we look at the love of wahi, when we look at the word of the Quran, how we understand the ma'na is by connecting it to the science of hadith. This is why this is also important. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-ulama'u warathatul anbiya." The task that Ambia fulfilled for previous messengers, for this ummah, the scholars will fulfill it. They won't need a new revelation to explain, rather, the whole science of hadith has been crystallized for us in time. This occurred, and I'll talk about this more later on, but I want to just, as a part of our introduction, so you understand what we're doing here and why this is so important. After Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, the Sahaba carried this baton and they preserved the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, something we'll discuss in some more detail later on, inshallah. I'll talk about some Sahaba and their efforts. And then following them came the Tabi'un and the Tabi'ut Tabi'un. But there was a generation of scholars that came in Islamic history who I view as a direct gift from Allah. These people were superhuman almost. Their memory, their integrity, their ability to preserve right down to the letter. It's something that you don't find. And not only was there one of them, there was a whole group of them that all came more or less at one time, in one era. And this is right before, including the time of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi. But a little more specifically, right before his time. Right before the time of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi, during that 2nd/3rd century window. Among them were the likes of Abu Zur'a al-Razi, who was such a genius, that he had to memory, the biographies of almost all the narrators of hadith. We're talking about catalogs of tens of thousands of people. He had them all memorized. Who was born where did he pass away, who did he meet, who were his students, who were his classmates, who were his teachers, whether it was possible for this person to hear a hadith or not. If you narrated two narrators in front of him, he could tell you from his memory that the possibility of these two people meeting is very low, because this person's travels took him through here, and this timeline, this person's travels took him through there, and that timeline, and there's no overlap there. The only possibility might be a small window in Hajj during 3 days. Therefore, I'm a little skeptical. Right? Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi, when he wrote his Sahih, before publishing it, he presented it to Abu Zur'a al-Razi. And he said to him, I need you to listen to the chains that I've narrated to see if there's anything that I'm missing. And Abu Zur'a al-Razi objected to, I think it was 6 or 9 narrations, which Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi then removed from his book. Right? And Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi alludes to this in the introduction to his Sahih Muslim, that I presented this book to the great scholars of my time and got their affirmation before publishing the book. So what we sit here to do is important, because we're trying to understand the story of hadith. What actually happened? How was it preserved? To the Western mind, this whole hadith phenomenon is so beyond its time. It's so beyond its time that they refuse to accept this is all real. So they say that Muslims actually had no concept of preservation of hadith until this 2nd century, where Abu Zur'a al-Razi, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri and others came in, and then they started collecting hadith, and then they made the whole tradition up. You guys get it? That for 150 years nothing existed, then they made it, and then they just kept fabricating and kept going from there. This is a wild accusation that has no basis to it, based off of 2 realities. And both of them are logical. I won't present any technical information that you require to memorize. Just 2 basic observational realities. Number 1, how is it possible that after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, the Sahaba would not dedicate their lives to preserving his life? How is that possible? If you meet someone who's lost a child, for the rest of their life they only speak and remember that child. My sister had a miscarriage, and it was far into the pregnancy. So one day she called me, this is like 2 weeks ago, she called me and said, so Hussain, we named the baby, and she said a name. And I said, what are you talking about, named a baby? I was so puzzled. And she said, you know the baby that I had so many years ago, that miscarriage that I had? I asked you that time what the legal ruling was on naming the child, and I told her that there is no obligation in naming a child that isn't born. I mean, there was a miscarriage. She said every day from that time, years later, it's been 6-7 years, I haven't been at peace with myself, so I decided to name the child. And she was in Chicago at that time. She said, I went back to my child's grave And I told my child that this is what I've named you. This is a mother who didn't even live with her child one living day. Are you guys paying attention? So how is it possible that after Rasulullah passed away, everyone just stopped talking about the Prophet? Everyone stopped imitating him, they stopped telling his stories, they just said, you know what, forget it. Is that conceivable? You guys tell me, yes or no? No, be honest, is that conceivable? It's absolutely impossible. Someone leaves their homeland from Palestine to come to America, all they talk about is what? The kunafa, they're talking about the zayt, they're talking about the trees, the grape, am I right? That's all they're talking about. So if people are talking about a country, if someone's talking about the chai of Pakistan, if someone's talking about the pasta that they had in Europe, is pasta more valuable than the life of Rasulullah? So this is one very badihi, aqli, clear jawab to this silly i'tirad. Number 2. This claim that Muslims had no hadith and then all of a sudden started collecting and everyone was on board indicates to the possibility that there was a collective conspiracy of the Ummah to fool the world. This is impossible too. Why is that? And this may seem far-fetched to some of you, but for those of you who have any insight to Islamic scholarship and the world of academia among early Muslim scholars, one thing I'll make very clear to you, from the time of the Sahaba, they were wildly critical of one another. Wildly critical. Very, very, very critical of one another. You guys understand this? Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi was so critical of his own teacher, of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi, that in his entire Sahih, he didn't narrate one hadith from him. And he studied most of his hadith with Imam Bukhari. But in his entire Sahih al-Bukhari, he did not narrate even one hadith because there were some issues that he became very critical of. Muslim scholars know nothing about a free pass. It doesn't exist. Even among the Sahaba, they openly criticize one another. The Tabi'un openly criticize one another. So a community that is so academically critical of one another, how is it possible that everyone says, you know what? Okay, let's just do this. Again, it's inconceivable that this is actually what happened. The story of hadith and the science of hadith is one that we must be aware of, so we learn to connect with our tradition. So we are confident and we believe that what Muslims have to say, everyone else will say religion is all made up. And for them it might be true because I can't speak on their behalf. But that claim cannot be made against Muslims because there were lives lost in this tradition for it to be preserved. People put their blood and sweat into it. They traveled the world on foot in poverty because of their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They longed to see him in a dream. They longed to see him in the hereafter. And it was that junoon, that craze, that made them forget all the pleasures of the world and just found themselves searching and seeking the true tradition of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it was that love that actually pushed them. And today we sit here, hopefully, a continuation of that very same tradition. We must learn about Hadith and Sunnah. And today our goal is going to be exactly that, inshallah. We're going to start off with some linguistics. The purpose of learning these linguistics is to, actually before the linguistics, I need to cover the benefits of studying Hadith. I'll do that first. But after that, that's a brief introduction. But then we're going to go into linguistics. And in the linguistics part, there's some terminology that we have to get to learn. And like I said, it's a science. This is not just made up stuff. So everything is carefully crafted and everything has a place. I teach the muqaddamah of Sahih Muslim at Qalam. It's an introduction to written by Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi to Hadith first and foremost, and then also to his book. This last time I was teaching it, not this year, last year when I was teaching it, I asked myself, I want to change my angle. I always teach it as a story of how Hadith was preserved. And we'll be doing a lot of that today. Like the story of Hadith. That's why I keep calling it the story of Hadith. That's what I think ulum al-Hadith actually is. I think it's actually the story of what happened. Whether it's through terminology or through names, through times, through people. Ultimately, it's a story of Hadith we're building out. I wanted to do something different. So what I did was, I did a study. I taught the Muqaddimah of Sahih Muslim from the perspective of fact-finding and how modern journalism can learn a lesson from how to preserve information from the muhaddithun. Because we have a crisis of information. And journalists have lost credibility. People don't trust media outlets anymore. So I drew a contrast between what modern day journalism represents and the practices here versus the task the muhaddithun took on of preserving hadith, and how they took theirs so seriously because their akhirah was dependent on it. And these people take theirs very lightly because it's all about clicks. It's about revenue. And when something is revenue driven versus akhirah driven, how the outcomes are so different. Hamdan, you understand? You guys understand this? Okay, chalo, theek hai, now we're ready. So we'll do some terminologies, and then after that we have some other matters that we plan to cover today too. So, benefits of studying hadith. I think the introduction we just covered right now is the greatest benefit, like being a part of that story. But the Prophet ﷺ made dua for those who studied hadith. نَظَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي. The Prophet ﷺ said, may Allah enlighten the face. Nadhara means to bring light to something. As Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ. Faces will be bright. Faces will be bright on the Day of Judgment. إِلَى رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. While they are looking at their Lord, observing the beauty of their Lord. So the Prophet ﷺ said, نَظَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَحَفِظَهَا وَوَعَاهَا. And that may Allah brighten the face of the one who hears my statement, then memorizes it, protects it, and then conveys it on to another. This hadith became the kind of like the favorite narration of the muhaddithun. Because every time they read hadith, every time they teach hadith, this hadith motivates them to do it even further. Therefore, you'll notice the muhaddithun, those who dedicate their lives to hadith, if you look at their faces, you'll see nur. There is a peace, a tranquility that follows them when they enter into a room. There's joy that's experienced. This, in reality, is a transference of the barakah of the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The second benefit of studying hadith is that it gives you an opportunity to constantly send salawat. Every time we say the Prophet's name, what do we say in return? Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's one thing I'm going to encourage you to do in the time that we have together today and tomorrow. Get into the habit of just sending salawat. Why miss out on it? In one narration, Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said, Al-Bakhil alladhi dhukirtu indahu falam yusalli alayhi. The miserly, stingy one is the one who I am mentioned in the presence of, meaning that person hears my name, dhukirtu indahu, I am mentioned in front of that person, falam yusalli alayhi, and that person still doesn't send salawat upon me. But why? Why are you holding back? Someone asked me this question. Why do we send salawat upon the Prophet? Didn't Allah already give him everything? What do you guys think? Like, what's the point? So then I said to this guy that you're a dummy. I'm not paraphrasing. I said you're a dummy. And until you don't solve this issue, you will find a block in your spiritual growth. You're under the assumption that by sending salawat upon the Prophet, you're doing him something. You think too much of yourself. You think you're an Apple store, you're the consumer, and that you're always right, and that everyone has to serve you, and everyone has to be benefiting from you. That if you're in a gathering of people, you need to make sure you leave your stamp behind too. It's like those people who comment in the comment section, even though they have nothing to say really meaningful, but they just want to, apna thappa laga, I was here too. When I was young, people used to write it in toilets. This person was here, and they would put the year next to it. They wanted to make sure, stamp it, that my presence was here. So we stopped doing that in toilets, and now we do it on social media. We just apna thappa laga, I was here too. I was a part of this conversation. My thoughts are this. Maybe the toilet is more suitable for that stamp of yours. May Allah protect us. So I said to this individual, in reality, when you're sending salawat upon the Prophet, you're doing nothing for the Prophet, you're just doing it for yourself. If you were to give your first paycheck to your parents, would you increase them in wealth or increase yourself in honor? Your answer really depends on what kind of person you are. Someone may think that I actually just made my mom and dad wealthier, while another person would think it was a humble move from a humble child to their generous parents. I'm honored that I got a chance to hand my first paycheck over to my mom and dad. Right? They'll cry in joy, not because they increased in wealth, but because they see your appreciation. And that's why Rasulullah loved for the Sahaba to send salawat upon him. That's why he wants the Ummah to send salawat. That's your way of saying, thank you, O Messenger of Allah, you were awesome. I really appreciate it. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Removal of false attributions to the Prophet ﷺ. Because unfortunately, due to external and internal forces, this pure science of hadith, people have attempted to dilute it and fill it with filthy, inappropriate statements falsely attributed to Rasulullah. Something we'll talk about in more detail later on, inshallah. So by studying the science of hadith, we are now able to differentiate between what is right and what is wrong. We don't want everyone to attribute everything to the Prophet ﷺ. You guys understand? We don't want this to turn into like a wild, random Instagram account that just has pictures of flowers in the back and inspiring statements on it and all attributed to the Prophet of Allah. If you have an inspirational statement, keep it to yourself. We want to hear what the Prophet of Allah said. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's words are mubarak. They are a form of revelation. Bear that statement in mind. We'll come back to it later. And the truth is that it's the closest way a person can be to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In this dunya, the closest you can be to the Prophet is to build proximity, to gain proximity to his words. As the Arabic poet says, Ahlul Hadith hum Ahlul Rasul. The people of Hadith are the people of the Messenger. فَإِن لَمْ يَصْحَبُوا نَفْسَهُ أَنفَاسُهُ قَدْ صَحِبُوا. Even though they did not gain companionship with his being, nafsahu, with the individual. أَنفَاسُهُ قَدْ صَحِبُوا. But they have taken companionship with his breath, which is the words of the Prophet of Allah. These were the words that exited his Mubarak mouth as he breathed. أهل الحديث هم أهل الرسول فإن لم يصحبوا نفسه أنفاسه قد صحبوا. Okay, so now we enter into the next discussion of what is hadith. The word hadith, what does it mean? Muslim scholars, when defining something, look at the linguistic definition and then also the technical definition as well. What does that term mean in context when we're using it in our subject? Definitions are very important. Never underestimate the power of language. Policies, listen to this carefully. Policies, even in our modern political world, are built off of language. If you want to change a nation, change a people, change people's perspective about something, one of the first things you need to do is what? Change language. Do you guys understand? Get rid of the word occupation. Because as long as people use the word occupation, that's a problem. We have to get rid of that word. And they will spend millions of dollars people will spend just to get the language right. So when you want to build image of anything, you first need a think tank and need to figure out what do we want and what language represents that the best. And then you start from there. You guys understand this? Always start with the language, right? The whole LGBTQ agenda started off with language in the 80s and 90s. At that time, most people didn't catch it. They didn't know what was going on. But today we see how those tens and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars they poured into the language that was slowly placed in sitcoms and placed in TV shows and placed in movies. That language slowly changed the perception of people, and today the whole thing is viewed from a different perspective by some. You guys understand? So language is very important. You have to always get the language right. Okay? Hadith. Now linguistically, the word hadith can have three meanings. Number one, it could refer to speech. So this, any sort of meaningful talk, you would call it hadith, right? Then you have the second, which hadith could also mean something new. Something new. In this case, the word hadith is the opposite of qadim. It's the opposite of qadim. What does qadim mean? Anyone know? Something old, right? So you have hadith and qadim. Hadith, something new. Qadim is something old. And the third meaning of hadith can also be pinned back to giving news or news, just news in general. They also refer to that as hadith. The news, a story. هل أتاك حديث ضيف إبراهيم المكرمين. Hadith. Some good chai. That finishes the majlis off. MashaAllah, there we go. Why was the word hadith selected by the scholars of hadith to refer to the statements of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Why this word? Why not another word? How did this word become so prominent? Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala in his Fath al-Bari and Allama Sakhawi rahmatullahi alayh in his Fath al-Mughith say, revelation is of two types, Quran and hadith. This hadith, okay? Quran, Kalamullah, the Quran, another word for Quran is Kalamullah, the speech of Allah, is qadim. Here, we're not going to translate qadim as old, rather we'll translate it as? Anyone? Original, what else? Sacred. I like infinite, we're heading in the right direction. Qadim in this context means without a time, without a beginning. Do you guys understand? Qadim is something that has no beginning to it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadim. Do you guys understand that? It has nothing predates it, nothing precedes it. So Kalamullah is qadim, one form of revelation. Hadith came into existence, meaning it's something that was predated by non-existence. Therefore, the opposite of hadith, qadim is hadith, so this became hadith. You guys understand? So Ibn Hajar's argument is the reason why the word hadith was used to refer to this subject is because it's the second form of revelation. One form of revelation is Kalamullah, that's qadim. This is the second one, which is Kalamul Rasul, and therefore it's hadith, because hadith is the opposite of qadim. This is Ibn Hajar rahmatullahi alayh's reasoning for why the word hadith has been used. Allama Shabir Ahmad Uthmani rahimahullah ta'ala in his Fath al-Mulhim, he puts a spin on it. It's a little bit of a fetch, but it's still a good one. His reasoning. He says the reason is because it all connects back to Surah al-Duha. What does he say? It all connects back to Surah al-Duha. In Surah al-Duha, Allah mentions three favors of Allah on the Prophet, and then mentions the method of how to thank Allah for those favors. Is that right? أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Allah mentions three favors, and then how to thank Allah for those favors. Number one, He found you an orphan and granted you refuge. So how do you thank Allah for that favor? فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Do not oppress an orphan. Number two, He found you poor and made you self-sufficient. So what's the solution to that? Do not repel the one asking. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Number three, He found you lost. Lost here means not with revelation, right? And guided you, taught you revelation. So how do you thank Allah for this one? وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. So he says that's where the word hadith is taken from, because Allah told the Prophet of Allah, hadith, and the whole science is hadith. It's all basically Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam thanking Allah for guidance. Does that make sense to you guys? You guys understand it? I said it's far-fetched because it seems like a very long circle to go into. It's a beautiful reflection nonetheless. That's why I shared it with you. The point is still sound. Mufti Muhammad Taqi Uthmani and other scholars of hadith, I quote him because I'm referring to his book on the authority of the Sunnah here. And he's not the only one. I think many other scholars have made this statement. They say the reason why the word hadith was used to refer to this whole subject matter is because the Prophet of Allah used that word himself to refer to his statements. And this is the most obvious one. I think this is probably, wallahu alam, the more correct one because it's a simple solution. Does that make sense? The Prophet of Allah, as I mentioned you earlier, he says in one riwayah, Man hafidha ala ummati arba'ina haditha. Whoever memorizes 40, what's the Arabic word used there? Hadith. The Prophet referred to his own statements as hadith. So that becomes easy if the Prophet referred to his statements as hadith. So therefore, when moving forward, we will refer to them also as hadith. Similarly, in one riwayah, the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahumma arham khulafa'ana. May Allah's mercy be upon our successors. Qulna ya Rasulullah wa ma khulafa'ukum. So the Messenger of Allah, what are your successors? Who are your successors? قال الذين يأتون من بعدي يروون أحاديثي وسنتي. Those that will come after, and they will narrate ahadithi wa sunnati, my ahadith and sunnah. يعلمونها الناس, and they will then educate and teach people that sunnah. Inshallah, you guys are a part of the beneficiaries of this this promise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that discussion is done. Now let's go into the technical definition of the word hadith. What does it mean? You'll note here that we have three camps. The muhaddithun, fuqaha, usuliyun. The muhaddithun, fuqaha, and usuliyun. The reason why these three are here is because in order to get a true picture of what a hadith means and how it's supposed to look like in our life, you need all three of these people. What do you need? All three of these people. Only one of these won't work. Earlier today at lunch, I mentioned an analogy that the common person, the common Muslim, should have the easiest solutions so they can live as Muslims and just move on with life. They don't need to face too much technicality. Does that make sense? They'll feel overwhelmed. Is that right? Like if you went to your parents or your grandparents and started filling them in on all these wild, crazy technical issues, they're going to feel overwhelmed because they're average people. Their example is like someone who goes to the Chase website. The consumer doesn't need to know about the cybersecurity that's in place, about the coding that happened in the back end. They just need to go, click, username, password, click, 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 close browser. You understand? That's how it needs to be in the front end. But in the back end, in order for it to work, you need to make sure all the pieces are in place. And the reason is because, have you guys ever seen a house of cards? No? No one's ever seen a house of cards? No, not the show. Like a house of cards. You guys know what a house of cards is, right? Every piece is carefully put in place because if you move one, what happens? It all falls. This is very important. Every hadith is connected to 10 legal issues. And 10 legal issues are connected to 5 ahadith. It's all a very sophisticated web. You may think as a consumer that this is like the Chase website, that it's very simple. Username, password, and whoever put this website together probably did it in 3 hours. But in the back end, the people know that we spent years on getting this website to where it is. Sharia is the same way. It's all very carefully connected. I wish I could explain this to you, but I can't because that's a whole different subject. If I had the chance, if you guys ever found yourself at Qalam and I had the opportunity to teach you guys Islamic law, I would hopefully be able to demonstrate to you like I do for the students there, how it's all very carefully and delicately connected. One change here changes what? 5 other issues. So you have to be careful. If you change one masala, it affects another masala right away. I was convinced that mechanically slaughtered chicken is halal to eat based off of what? Should I tell you? Based off of the verdict fuqaha gave about mics. About the usage of a mic. You guys are probably wondering, what is this guy talking about? Everything is connected. As absurd and mundane that sounds, I'm telling you, the masala of the permissibility of using a microphone in salah is one of the strongest arguments for the permissibility of eating chicken that is mechanically slaughtered, given that Allah's name is mentioned there. Now, again, I'm not going to explain it to you guys, but I want you to understand and know that the things that you think have nothing to do with one another, at a technical level, because of the way framework is made, they are actually all connected. Are you guys with me? Now here, the way the scholars explain the relationship between these guys, these 3 camps right here, usuliyun are the policymakers. Who are the usuli folks? These guys have the toughest task in the universe. They have to build parameters and policy. What that means is, no matter what happens, every ruling, every hadith, every interpretation of hadith must fall within this policy. If it doesn't, it won't be actionable. We'll put it in a parking lot. You guys understand this? Yes or no? So let's say, for example, there was a hadith. I'm making this up. I'm just being lazy right now. Okay, I'm not thinking of a good one, lazy one. Let's say there was a hadith that happened to be like accepted. It wasn't like super authentic, not super weak. It's somewhere in the middle. You guys following me here? It's somewhere in the middle. And it says, that narration were to say, black people are horrible. Do you guys understand? Now the muhaddith would say that this is what it says and it's acceptable by me. The faqih would then give verdicts based off of that avoid black people. Astaghfirullah. Pay attention. The usuli would come in and say this is outside of our parameters because it contradicts our policy, which is that Islam does not bring harm to any human being based off of X, Y, and Z narrations and ayat of the Quran. Therefore, either reinterpret it or put it in a parking lot. This will not be actionable at all. You guys understand? So who are the policymakers? The usuliyun. Their job is to make sure the policies are right. So every statement must be interpreted in just that. If the Quran says Allah has a hand, we will accept it. But we know from the usuliyun that anthropomorphism is not permitted in Islam. It is a form of kufr and shirk. So therefore, we cannot interpret it that way. It cannot happen. It's impossible. The policy is that. You guys know anthropomorphism? To attribute human-like features to God. So usuliyun set policy. Everything must fit within this. Now their policy also comes from Quran and Sunnah. So don't think that it's randomly made up. Right? That's why you have to study usul. Usul al-hadith, usul al-fiqh, usul al-tafsir. Everything has usul. Tafsir has usul. Usul al-tarikh. So now when you're studying history, you know the usul. So everything has to fit within these parameters. These very well-established parameters. The muhaddithun, the ulama would refer to them as the pharmacists. Their job is to categorize things, make sure things are packaged right, make sure that everything is kept separately. This is toxic, this is healthy. They categorize and shuffle things into place. You guys understand? They identify elements, medicines. So their job is to sort, make sure things are clean. The fuqaha are the physicians in this equation. Their job is to prescribe. So the muhaddith packages the information and then he passes it on to the faqih. The faqih then gives the ruling of what we will do with this information. Muhaddithun generally don't give fatwa. Their job is to work with data and information. I'm going to come back to this word later on, this language, okay? The fuqaha's job is what? To process that information based off of the work of the usuliyun. The usuliyun will tell them these are the parameters to process the information. These guys will feed that information. the fuqaha now package it and put it out to the common folks. The common person does not deal with a muhaddith or an usuli. They interact with a faqih. And this is why most students, when they study advanced sciences of Islam, they choose to specialize in Islamic law, because that's where you interact with people. You guys understand this? Does that make sense to you? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now that we have three different areas, the second thing I need you to know, and this is an important one, very important. One term can have a different meaning based off of which one of these departments is using it. You guys understand that? One word can have a different meaning, completely different meaning, depending on what subject and science you're using it in. This happens in modern day, in our world as well. A particular term, if used in a mathematical sense, can mean something very different from when used in a scientific sense. One word. You guys understand? So now we have to make sure that we understand what this word hadith means with all three of these folks, because each one has a different goal they're trying to accomplish, and therefore when they use that word, there are different definitions they work by. The muhaddithun, they are data collectors and processors. More like data collectors. Their job is to collect what? Collect information. That's their task. It's all about verification, collecting, and ensuring that message, that statement that they're passing on is fully explained. So they will work on figuring out where this hadith came from, authenticating it, making sure the words are sound. There's no questioning regarding the words, that if there are any issues with the words, they will clarify it. They will then also interpret any words that are difficult, mushkil al-hadith, any language that needs to be explained. They will also explain if there's any contradiction between a hadith. That's a part of their package. Okay? Their job is to give you an end product, that at the end of this day, this is what this hadith means. And because they are information collectors, what that means is their definition of hadith will be the broadest definition out of all of these people, because they need to broaden the net. They're collecting data. Is that correct? Because they're collecting information, they need to make sure their net is broad. So from a hadith perspective, from the muhaddith's perspective, when we define hadith, they say, ما أثر على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, that which is narrated from the Prophet of Allah, من قول أو فعل أو تقرير أو صفة خلقية أو خلقية أو سيرة سواء كان قبل البعثة أو بعدها. Okay, that's it. So these are the points. Number one. So they say that which is narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, من قول. قول means speech. Number two, أو فعل. Actions, very good. أو تقرير. Anyone know what the word taqreer means? What was it? Affirmation, yeah. Silent approvals. There are different words that are used. You know, something happened in the presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he did not refute it. So therefore we say there's taqreer. That Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave his silent approval here. أو صفة خلقية أو خلقية. Or any physical or characteristic or character description. Any physical or character description. Sifatin khalqiyya, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's physical features. His hair was very long, wasi' al-jabeen, beautiful broad forehead, ala sadr, a lifted chest, sawa' al-sadri wal-batan, straight chest and stomach, bu'ayda ma bayn al-mankibayn, a very broad shoulder, bayna katifayhi khatam al-nubuwah. So this is all sifatin khalqiyya. These are all physical features. Aw sifa khulqiyya. Sifa khulqiyya, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was a very humble person, soft-spoken person. He was bashful. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was generous. So description of his characteristics. Are you guys with me? Okay. Aw sira. or anything to do with the Prophet's biography. Any stories, any history, anything that happened during his lifetime. Because something that happened in his biography is not necessarily his statement, not necessarily his action. It may have been something that happened around his lifetime. Umar radiallahu anh did something in his presence. You guys understand? So this is what we call seerah. The story, the biography of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. سواء كان قبل البعثة أو بعد. Regardless of it being prior to or after prophethood. So even if it happened before Nubuwah, we consider that hadith as well. So in one hadith we will learn that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a part of the construction of the Kaaba. Now that happened prior to Nubuwah. It's still a hadith. You guys see how the muhaddithun have this broad net? They're trying to cover everything. Now you come to the usuliyun. The usuli scholars are building policy, and because they're building legal framework and policy, they have, again, just bear in mind that I'm trying to be brief and technical. So if my words sound disrespectful, they're not meant that way. I'm just using more clear language so we can cut through some of the discussion, right? They aren't interested in biography. You guys understand? That doesn't relate to them. Similarly, their policies are not going to be built off of the physical features of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Similarly, their policies are not going to be built off of the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are all important things. Don't get me wrong. That's why I said it may sound disrespectful, but no, that's not the case. They are interested in three things. So the usuliyun have a very narrow definition of hadith. ما نقل عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من قول أو فعل أو تقرير. انتهى. That's it. They're interested in three things. What did the Prophet say? What did the Prophet do? And tell us about those silent affirmations, those silent confirmations of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those silent approvals. Now, the jurists, when they use the word sunnah or hadith, sunnah more specifically here, not so much hadith, but even hadith. The word hadith and sunnah, when they use it more as not so much hadith. Let me start again. When we're talking about hadith, the fuqaha tend to use it in the same meaning as the usuli scholars. Let's just get that out of the way. Okay? Because they're jurists. They need legal matter. They need data that benefits them in a legal sense. So that's the sort of hadith that they're interested in. Now when it comes to sunnah, in hadith, sunnah refers to an action that was commanded by the Prophet of Allah, but was not decreed to be at the level of obligatory. You guys understand? So when we use the word sunnah in a legal sense, what does that mean? The Prophet did it, it's a good thing to do, but it's not obligatory. That's what it means. It's a categorization of a command. And it's a command that's second to obligation. According to the Hanafis, third. We have fard, wajib, sunnah. That's how we do it. And to the Jamhur, it's fard and sunnah. Right? So it's second to being obligatory. So that's our definitions of hadith and the scholarly camp. Now, let's go over to sunnah very quickly. Linguistically, sunnah means like a way, course, a role model. You want to take a break? Should I finish this part off? Let me finish this slide off, then we'll take a break. Okay. Actually, let me do two more. How about that? Then we'll be done with part one, then we can take a break. Alhamdulillah. So what did I say sunnah meant? A way, course, role, manner. Sheikh Jamal Zarabozo, for those of you who know him, he has great contributions on the introduction to hadith. I believe these days, if I'm right, he lives in California. Wallahu a'lam, I'm not sure. Is that right? He is one of the earlier teachers of many of the scholars in America. like in the 90s, he was one of the prominent teachers and he traveled and taught. So he wrote a book on hadith, it's in English, Sheikh Jamal Zarabozo. So when he defined sunnah, he said, a way pursued by former people and has become one preserved by those after them. This is how linguistic definition. Linguistically, when he defined sunnah, he said, a way pursued by former people and has been preserved by those after. Again, that manner, that role, that way. You see, something that's continuously practiced. Now, the technical definition of sunnah. I like the language that Dr. Brown used in his work in hadith. While defining the word sunnah, technically he said, the normative legacy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What did we say? The normative legacy of the Prophet. The normative legacy of the Prophet. Normative legacy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now I'm going to say a statement. I want you to write it down. Whether you understand it or not, it doesn't matter. Just write it down, and I'll explain to you. So once we've defined sunnah, the normative legacy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, now my following statement is: hence the word sunnah is khas and hadith is am. Hence, the word sunnah is khas and the word hadith is am. Hence, the word sunnah is khas and the hadith is am. Now, the second statement, keep writing. Therefore, every sunnah is a hadith, not every hadith is a sunnah. Therefore, every sunnah is a hadith. Not every hadith is a sunnah. Ab batao, what does the word khas mean? Specific, I like that, good. And then am, general, broad. Okay. Hadith refers to everything. Sunnah refers to that hadith that we say was the normative legacy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Something the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did habitually, normally. Okay. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi, I'll give you an example. Let me explain this to you. So therefore I said every sunnah is a hadith. Is that right? Because the only way you can know that this is the normative legacy is if there is a hadith that backs it up. Is that right, guys? But is every hadith going to be a sunnah? Therefore, we don't follow Quran and Hadith, we follow Quran and Sunnah. We are people that refer to ourselves as Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Bear that in mind. Because not every hadith is actionable. Not every hadith is actionable. Let me give you an example. It is in an established narration. The Prophet ﷺ urinated standing. Ata Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam subatata qawmin فَبَالَ قَائِمًا وَتَوَضَّأَ فَمَسَحَ نَاصِيَتَهُ. This is the riwayah. From this riwayah, it's an established narration, the Prophet ﷺ stood and urinated. Is that a hadith? Yes or no? Yes. I just narrated it to you and I'm telling you, take my word, it's established, okay? Is it a hadith? Yes. Is it a sunnah? No. No one would say that it's sunnah to stand and urinate. But you would say, but it's a hadith. But the response would be, that is a hadith, not the normative legacy. You guys understand this? How we know it's not the normative legacy is by a broad survey of the ahadith. What was the normal practice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So in order to understand what is sunnah, that's where you need usul and fuqaha to come in place and work with the muhadithun to figure out what the standard was and then figure out what the outliers are. But this is still a narration. So why did the Prophet do it? Now the Muhaddithun explain, number one, bayanan lil jawaz, to show that it is permissible in times of need. Number two, this is most likely something that occurred towards the end of the Prophet's life, and everyone knows that he had knee pain, so maybe he didn't want to squat to avoid, experiencing that pain. Another possibility here is that the riwayah does not mention that after he urinated, he washed himself, so he didn't have water. Had he sat down and urinated, it's possible that he would have defecated and would definitely need water. So to avoid that, he stood up and urinated. Another possibility is, I said in the riwayah, subata taqom, he came to the wasteland where people would dump their garbage. Maybe the Prophet didn't sit down because he wanted to avoid making any sort of physical contact or gaining unnecessary proximity to that dirt, so he remained standing. These are all tawjihat and possibilities. This is what shuruh al-hadith do. They help us understand the riwayah in its context. You guys understand this? I'm going to give one last analogy and then we'll move on. And this analogy helps me understand this issue. People say, I said it helps me understand this issue. Let me tell you what the issue is first. The issue is, people say, if there's one Quran, one Sunnah, there should only be one fiqh. What do you guys think about that? Be honest, it's okay. I'm not going to judge you. Maybe a little bit, not too much. One Quran, one Sunnah, one Quran. We have Quran and Hadith, there should only be one legal outcome. I think this is an absurd statement. And not based off of any reason other than the fact that this contradicts everything that you may learn in a psych class regarding research methodology in college. I can understand this statement being appealing to someone that hasn't done any true research in their life. This is not in a belittling way, I'm being honest. That makes sense. If you haven't done any meaningful research in your life, any academic research, that kind of conclusion would make sense. That here's a body of information, it can only lead to one conclusion. But if you've done any meaningful research in your life, what you know is that you can have multiple outcomes from one body of information based off of your research methodology. It all boils down to your, what did I say, folks? Research methodology. You know, every time you scan your key fob at Walmart, you get a discount. They give you that discount because you're handing over your information to them. Every person that scans passes on their information. Sana purchased milk from this location, this many gallons at this time on this date. Is that right? How much information, if we were to write each statement on one piece of paper, how much information, how much data do you think Walmart has? An absurd amount, like some silly amount, containers and buildings and skyscrapers full of data. If they took one piece of information, let's say I took one tag right here, and I said, this paper says Hamdan purchased milk at 11 p.m. from the Walmart on, I don't know, whatever, Layton Road or something, one of these roads here, in August. Therefore, I said, from now on Layton Road, on August, we will only sell milk, forget everything else. Because this data says she purchased milk. You guys understand this? That would be a faulty thing to do. Because data in its raw format cannot be used for deduction. You have to put it through a system. You always have to put it through a system. There are data analysts, and this is what they do for a living. Raw data is not actionable. Always remember this. This is academics 101, research 101. You cannot take raw data and start acting upon it. In order for it to mean anything, it has to go, this is what you call garbage journalism. That you pick up hearsay, one piece from there, and you start pumping it out. In order for it to be meaningful, there's investigative journalism. Investigative journalism, how long does that process take? Years, absolutely. You know this big expose that they did against FIFA about its corruption? I mean, everyone knew about it, but the full expose that came out, this was a 10-year project. It's investigative journalism. It takes time. You have to carefully review and peer review and review again. So what Walmart does is that it takes all this raw data, they feed it through systems that they then hire third parties to analyze, and then at the end they now have actionable items. These actionable items help them stock their stores carefully to get maximum profits and maximum sales. Do you guys understand this? This is the same ta'alluq between hadith and fiqh and usuliyun. The usuliyun take that data, they feed it on, no, the muhaddithun take the data, give it to the usuliyun who put it through their principles, and depending on what kind of research methodology they have, they will have different outcomes. They will have different outcomes. Now the jurists will prescribe based off of what they have in front of them. Does that make sense? One more example I'll give, and then I'll just quickly, 1 second, 1 minute, we'll cover the next slide, then we'll take our break. One last example. According to Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayh, when a person does the second sajda of the first rak'ah, and they are standing up to the second rak'ah, they take a brief sit, and then they stand up. This is what we call jalsatul istiraha, the sitting of like a break. You're taking a little break, right? Taking a little break, and then you stand up. The Hanafis, we don't accept this. We say after you stand up right away. Why? Because the Hanafis rely on the narration of, by the way, the narration they're using that the Prophet ﷺ would sit briefly and stand up is an authentic narration. What did I say? Authentic. It's an authentic narration. It's from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. The Hanafis say this narration is not actionable, so we don't act on it. Why? Because we say that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu observed and lived with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the last 3 years of his life. Last 2/3 years of his life. And it is well known that towards the end of the Prophet's life, he had knee pain. So him sitting before he stood up was actually a result of his knee pain. All the senior companions who narrate his salah make no mention of this sitting. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu was the 6th person to accept Islam. He prayed salah with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for over 20 years. And he explicitly says the Prophet would stand up without a sitting. We say that sitting was due to illness. It was not because it's a part of salah. And all the other riwayat from the more senior companions show exactly that. It's an authentic narration, 2 different ways of looking at it. One is prescribing it as normative legacy. The other is prescribing it as circumstantial. That if someone needs it, if there's a circumstance, you can sit. If you don't have the circumstance, you stand up. So the crux is understanding what is sunnah. Now, 1 or 2 more things. The next slide, if you go to it, you'll see your next page if you scroll down. We have a discussion on different types of sunnah. There is a sunnah differentiation that some jurists make, sunnah mu'akkada and ghair mu'akkada. This is basically in terms of emphasis. There are some sunnahs of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he did with great punctuality, yet did not prescribe them to be obligatory. For example, the 2 rakah sunnah before Fajr. The Sahaba, they say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would not miss them even if he was traveling. So he did it with punctuality. Yet the Prophet of Allah did not make them fard. So this is what we call sunnah mu'akkada. Sunnah ghair mu'akkada is that sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he would do, but he would allow for it to be missed every now and then. And the other categorization of sunnah, we have them as 2 different ones. In reality, this is just one categorization. It's just 2 different terminologies. One is what we call sunnatul huda, and the second is what we call sunnatul ada. You see underneath there where it says ibadah and zawaid. You guys see that in your book? Ada and zawaid are the same thing. So if you want to just kind of circle them together or line them up, they're the exact. It's just different terms. It's the exact same thing. There are no two definitions here. And huda and ibadah are the same thing too. Huda and ibadah are the same thing. There's no difference there. It's the same thing. It's different terminology. This is a very important categorization of sunnah. Very important. And it's something that muhaddithun deal with a lot of. When they're dealing with this, they have to be very careful. Sunnatul huda refers to that sunnah which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam commanded someone to do or mentioned the virtue of doing it for others. You need to do this as well. Sunnatul ada is something Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did habitually, regularly, but he never told anyone else to do it. It was a personal, private practice of his that was ada. It was his normal habit. You guys understand this? So for example, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wake up, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh narrates in his riwayah of Baytutat Ibn Abbas in the Kharatihi Maymuna radiallahu anha, that narration. He says that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam woke up, he took the inner palm parts of his palm and he rubbed his eyes like this. Other narrations also mention this, that when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam would wake up, he would take his palms and rub his eyes like this. And then he would read his dua. This is called Sunnatul Ada. If a person practices it out of love, great. But there is no religious obligation or even emphasis on doing this. The act itself does not hold virtue. The virtue will come if you do this act out of love for the Prophet of Allah. Examples of this: almost everything to do with clothes. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wore 2 garments, 2 sheets. That was his ada. It was not sunnatul ibadah. Therefore, you're not required, or it's not even encouraged for you to walk around in 2 sheets. If you did do that, saying that my love for the Prophet of Allah is such that I would like to even imitate this, you'll get reward off of the intention, the thought that I'm trying to imitate the Prophet of Allah. Similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would eat melon and dates together when eating. Similarly, there are narrations of cucumber and dates being paired together. So these are all called sunnatul. Which one, guys? Ada. These are ada. That these are things Rasulullah. Miswak, sunnatul ibadah, because the Prophet ﷺ commanded the companions to do it. You guys understand? That is ibadah. So you have to make this distinction. Many ulama argue even the wearing of the hat that men wear, this is ada. Because there is no narration where Rasulullah ﷺ told someone to do it. But he did it himself regularly. So the ulama, by the way, the higher ground is for a person to even imitate sunnatul ada. That is the higher ground. You know, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would eat with 3 fingers instead of 5. Sunnatul ada. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would sit a particular way when he sat. You know, with his knees up, sometimes one knee up, sometimes the other knee up, sometimes both knees down, tashahhud position. Sunnatul ada. Rasulullah forbade people from sitting in an arrogant way when eating. That's another issue altogether. But it's exactly how you're supposed to sit, that's sunnatul ada. So we have to make a distinction when we're studying hadith. Did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do this out of being a human being, his human inclination, what he desired to do as a human? Or was this actually something legislated that's a part of the deen? There aren't too many issues like this, but there are some, and the muhaddithun do a very good job at clarifying them. So with that, we will conclude. There are some other terms, athar and khabar. In reality, they are loosely used, sometimes to refer to the statements of Rasulullah. Sometimes they're used synonymously as hadith. Sometimes they're used to refer to just a statement of the Sahaba. Sometimes they're used just to refer to the statements of those who follow the Sahaba, like tabi'un and so on. But I won't spend too much time there, because inshallah, as far as we're concerned, they all are interchangeably used. Athar is interchangeably used. Khabar is interchangeably used with hadith as well. So with that, we'll conclude here. Pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts and grants tawfiq to the amal of what we learn. Inshallah, we'll take a 5-minute break, and thereafter we will go into our mustalah al hadith discussion regarding the terminology. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So now we're going to head over to the second chapter of our discussion, categories and classifications of hadith. Not all reports are the same. Not all ahadith are the same. One of the famous objections made by Western Orientalists against hadith, there are a list of them, but one of the more famous ones that they tried to claim to discredit narrations from the Prophet ﷺ was the fact that they say, you Muslims accept that they are fabricated narrations. So how can hadith then be trusted? You guys understand? You Muslims accept that they are fabricated narrations. So how could we accept your hadith if you're saying they are fabricated ones? So our answer to this is, hadith fabrication did occur. It's unfortunate, It's sad, and we will talk about why it occurred, inshallah, later in the class. We have some pages dedicated to that. But Muslims didn't accept defeat once the enemy started working against us. When hadith fabricators started fabricating, we became as intense in preserving. And Muslim scholars created a very detailed system of classifying narrations. This whole system, the language that they use for their coding, I keep using the coding example because some of you might be familiar with it. The language they used for building out the science is what we refer to as mustalahul hadith, meaning hadith terminology. Now, this is something that can easily be taught over an entire semester or year. What we are going to touch on today is the summary of the summary of the summary of the summary of the whole discussion. Okay? You guys understand? Khulasatul 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 khulasa. That's what we're going to try to do right now. I'm going to try to really summarize some of these conversations for you. When I read Mustalahul Hadith as a student, I was very overwhelmed by it because there were so many terms thrown at me and it all just sounded mumble jumble and I didn't get the idea of why we needed so many terms. Why couldn't there just be Sahih and Da'if and let's call it a day? Why do we have like another 25 terms that I have to memorize? But each term is relevant. And we're going to look at why they're relevant and how different terminology comes into existence when we're studying hadith. Okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is when we study hadith, there are two aspects to a hadith. Every narration has two components to it. Every narration has how many? Two components. Every single riwayah has two components. Component A, this is a part of this the scope of hadith. This discussion is a part of that. Yeah, there you go. You're good. So every hadith has two components to it. You can probably see it above you. Riwayah and dirayah. But don't write that. I'll tell you what to write. Matan and sanad. Sanad and matan. These are the two components to every single narration. Sanad and matan. What is sanad? Chain. So everything in the narration, right until the point قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, is considered to be a sanad. Everything in the chain, right until the point what? قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So something like, for example, عن كثير بن مرة عن معاذ بن جبل قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So this Kathir bin Murrah from Mu'adh ibn Jabal, all of that is considered to be sanad. After Qala Rasulullah, whatever comes next, what is that called? Matan, which means the text. So person A narrates from person B, who narrates from C, D, E, F, G, who said the Prophet of Allah said, actions are based off of intentions. Everything until actions are based off of intentions is all considered to be what? Sanad. And then the statement, the actual text, matan, matan, إنما الأعمال بالنيات is the matan. Now each one is studied independently in the sciences of hadith. There are two different studies here. The study of the sanad is what we call ilmu riwayatil hadith. Ilmu riwayatil hadith. The science of the chain of the hadith. And the second one is what we call ilmu dirayatil hadith. The science of understanding the message of the hadith. The science of understanding the message, dirayatul hadith. What's the lesson from the narration? Why are there so many terminologies? Why are they like, and by the way, I said 20, 30, that's not true, it's over 50. Some have even categorized them close to 100. There are a lot of terms. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, most of the muhaddithun have books in this regard. And they're very detailed books. Ibn Salah's book is very famous as well. Yes?
Is all the terminology the same, or is it different from person to person?
Oh, that's a good question. For the most part, in the major terms, there's overlap. For the most part, in the major terms, there's overlap. Today, most of the stuff I'm going to cover, if not all of it, it's agreed upon stuff. But there is finer terminology where there is differences of opinion. Okay? We won't be covering that stuff today. But that's a very good question, by the way, because the implications of that at a higher hadith level are great. But again, outside the scope of this class, though. So, why is there so much terminology? The way I like to think of it is like this. When you look at something, let's say you looked at a person. Depending on what angle you look at them from, you're going to see something different and you will use a term to describe what you're seeing. Is that right? So for example, if I looked at Sheikh Amir, I'm looking at him right now from the perspective of him being a teacher to his community. So now he's a sheikh. Is that right? Now then I look at him standing next to his wife, he's a husband. I look at him standing next to his son, he's a father. So depending on what angle I'm looking at him from, what happens? A new terminology comes into existence while defining him, right? Because we're trying to understand what does this hadith mean from this angle. Now when we are looking at a hadith, there are 4 major perspectives that we need to study every hadith from. There are 4 major angles, 4 main perspectives we need to kind of look at from this angle, then go look at it from that angle, and then that angle and that angle. Number 1, where does it originate from?
Is this in the 4 perspectives?
Yep. Right there, the 4 key perspectives. Number 1, the origin. Number 1 is what? Origin. Number 2, I call this the path. In reality, this categorization is how many people in any given generation narrated this hadith. I'll explain more later. Well, when I say path, what am I interested in here? How many people in every generation narrated it? The muhaddithun are interested. At any point, does this narration just boil down to one person narrating this hadith and that's it? There were 10 people narrating it in one generation. Generation 2, 3 people. Generation 3, it all bottlenecks down to one person. You guys understand? And then it picks up to 10 again. So we want to know how many people were narrating this hadith in any given generation. That's what I'm talking about when I say path. The path through which it's come. How many people are narrating it along the path. Number 3 is about authenticity. How authentic is the narration? And number 4, we will be looking at omissions. Omissions refers to when a hadith is narrated, in the most ideal scenario, if there are 4 chains, A narrates from B, C, D, who narrates from the Prophet of Allah. Okay? So how many people do we have narrating here? 4. In the most ideal scenario, all 4 people are mentioned. Easy. Sanad muttasil, we're easy. This is very simple. The problem is when there's inqita. What that means is A, instead of narrating from B, narrates directly from C. And we know someone's missing. Sometimes he skips his teacher intentionally. You guys understand? Sometimes he skips his teacher. Hassan al-Basri would narrate from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is A, the Sahabi is B, Hassan al-Basri is C. He did not see the Prophet of Allah. Bil ittifaq. Hassan al-Basri did not see the Prophet of Allah. But when he narrates directly. He said, Qala Rasulullah. How can he say Qala Rasulullah when it's clear he's missing someone? He was known, Marasila of Hassan Basri are very well known in the science of hadith. They're viewed as if they're continuous. Why? Because Hassan al-Basri, when he would skip, most of the times he would skip Ali radiallahu anh and he would not mention his name because his teacher Ali radiallahu anh, due to unfortunate political situation at that time, became a controversial figure and people would not listen to him simply based off his teacher's name. There's a lot of politics and history at play here. So in order to avoid all of the problems, he just wanted people to learn the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Not because he was ashamed of Ali radiallahu anh, or Ali radiallahu anh was not a reliable narrator, none of that. He just wanted hadith to be apolitical. He wanted people to listen to hadith for the sake of it being hadith. So he would say, Qala Rasulullah. So this is an example of inqita'. We have a discussion. We're coming to that ahead. Okay? So that's about omissions. How many people are missing? Sometimes in a chain you have 2 people missing. It's a big problem. It's a bigger problem. You guys understand? 1 person missing. That's a problem. Where is that 1 person missing? So all this matters, and we'll come to that later on. So these are the 4 perspectives that we need to study every hadith from. What's number 1? Where does the hadith originate from? Number 2? Path. Number 3? Authenticity. And number 4? Now, let's look at it from its originating point. Number 1. A hadith can be, I already talked about the scope of evaluation, right? Actually I didn't. Let's talk about it. Where does it originate from? This matters. Why does it matter? Because we need to know who is saying this statement. It can have massive legal implication. So I'll explain to you. Now, even though we only have 3 here, there's a 4th one that needs to be added. I'll tell you the 4th one in a moment. The first is a hadith qudsi. A hadith qudsi is where the Prophet of Allah, when saying something, is saying the origin of the statement is directly from Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said this. And then the statement that he quotes, he narrates it to be in first person from Allah. My servant. Are you guys understanding this? There really isn't any major implication of a hadith being qudsi or not. Hadith qudsi, for the most part, have more to do with fada'il and virtue and spirituality. So there really isn't much of a legal implication that this is a higher hadith because of hadith qudsi. Does that make sense? So this first categorization of hadith qudsi, I put it in here. Most scholars don't put it. I added it. And the reason is because I felt that this is also a point of origin, right? The Prophet is saying it originated from here. That's why I included it. Now the next 3, there's a big impact. Legal impact and religious impact of where the hadith originates from. Number 2 is what we call marfu'. What's the word? Marfu'. Now I'm not going to explain the linguistics to all of it as much as I'd like to. I'm just going to kind of explain what they mean technically so we can move along. Marfu' means this statement ultimately originates from the Prophet of Allah. So a marfu' narration, if someone says, وَرُوِيَ مَرْفُوعًا إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, it has been narrated marfu', air quotes here, actions are based off intentions. The moment someone says marfu', we will then assume that before that statement there is a clause there, قَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. You guys understand this? Where does it originate from? The Prophet. The next one is mawquf. Mawquf is a statement that originates from a sahabi. وَرُوِيَ عَنْ عُمَرَ مَوْقُوفًا. It is narrated from Umar radiallahu anhu mawquf. So who is making this statement? It's not the Prophet's statement. Jurists need to know this. Because there's a difference between something being said by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam versus it being said by Umar radiallahu anhu, any sahabi, right? It has to be taken into consideration when we're legislating because every detail matters. Every single detail matters. Then you have another one, I want you to add this. This is what we call maqtu'. Maqtu' with a qaf and ta and ayn. Maqtu', cut off. Maqtu' means this is a narration that's attributed to a tabi'i. So this statement doesn't even originate from a sahabi. Rather, we can say, وَرُوِيَ عَنْ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مَقْطُوعًا. And it is narrated from Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi maqtu'an. Why? Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi was a tabi'i. So his statements that originate from him, in hadith terminology, we refer to them as maqtu'. Okay? So one last time, something that originates from a sahabi, what do we call that? mawquf. If it originates from the Prophet, marfu' sallallahu alayhi wasallam. If it originates from a tabi'i, maqtu'. And then Hadith Qudsi I just added for the sake of completing the formula that this is a narration that is attributed all the way back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, Hadith Qudsi is a statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam where the words he selects, but the message is in person directly from Allah. There are some differences between Hadith Qudsi and Quran. So people ask the question, they both seem to be the same. There's a difference. Mullah Ali al-Qari has a 40 hadith compilation on a Hadith Qudsiyah. When I used to teach the Hadith Intensive, which is where a lot of this content is from, I would actually cover that book as well. That was a reading that we did. We did the Bukhari reading that we're going to be doing tomorrow, and then we did that as well. The reason why I did that is because I felt that it really gives a student an insight to a spiritual reading of Hadith. Hadith Qudsi are very tazkiyah oriented. They're very heart softening and powerful. So he has a 40 Hadith collection, and because he is a muhaddith, he does a good job at kalam on the riwayah of every narration that he narrates. So he substantiates them, ensuring that these are authentic narrations or acceptable narrations. And if there are any weaknesses, he points them out. So it's an easier and good book to read. Anyway, so there in his muqaddimah, in his introduction of the Arba'in, he actually highlights some of the differences between Quran and Hadith Qudsi. I'll share a few with them. I'll share a few with you. I'm literally going to read through these. I won't spend much time elaborating though. I've written down some notes. I'm going to read through them and I won't elaborate too much just so we can move on and focus on some of the other parts of the class. Number one, the Quran was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ verbatim. That is, both its words and meanings are from Allah. The Hadith Qudsi is not a verbatim revelation. Its words are from the Prophet ﷺ, as I mentioned earlier. Number two, the Quran cannot be narrated or recited in one's own meaning. You can't do riwayah bil ma'na in the Quran. When you narrate a verse of the Quran, it has to be what? Exact, accurate. The ahadith may be narrated in words similar to the meaning of the actual wording for those who have profound mastery in the Arabic language. Riwayah bil ma'na is jaiz in hadith for those people who have mahara fil lugha. Those who understand language properly and its implication, they can actually narrate a hadith without using the exact same words. But what's the condition that I used? What does that mean? They need to know they need to be particular with their words. You can't just switcheroo words, because if you switcheroo words and you don't know what you're saying and you don't know your language properly, you're going to botch up the meaning. So it is jaiz. Number three, the words of the Quran are miraculous and cannot be replicated. This is a challenge of the Quran. That the words of the Quran they're mu'jiz, they're miraculous, and they cannot be imitated. While the words of the Hadith Qudsi are not of this nature. The challenge that the Quran says brings something similar to it does not extend to Hadith Qudsi. It is limited at what lies between Fatiha and An-Nas. The Quran is recited in formal prayers, salah, but Hadith Qudsi cannot be recited in prayers. One is not allowed to touch the Quran in a state of janaba, post-sexual impurity. Not necessarily post-sexual, but it's a major form of impurity. While there is no such prohibition for touching the books of Hadith Qudsi, because the ruling does not extend over. A person can lose his iman by rejecting a single word of the Quran. This is not true for Hadith Qudsiyah, which are not mutawatir in transmission. That's an extra condition that you have to add, and I'll explain that later. Because if you deny a hadith that's mutawatir in transmission, then you have a problem. And again, I'll explain the word mutawatir later on. It is an act of worship to recite Quran, and one is rewarded for each letter. This does not apply to the recitation of Hadith Qudsi. There is reward for reciting Hadith because you're being a part of the preservation of the Hadith. But there isn't like a per letter you get 10 rewards. Do you know how that promise is made for the Quran? That isn't extended over to the Hadith. Okay, so that's done. Now let's talk about paths. So the scope of this evaluation is to understand How many people are narrating a given narration in any generation? Yes?
Do you mind repeating that? I'm sorry. For the scope of...
The scope of this is to understand, to know how many people are narrating any given narration in each generation, at each point in that narration's history. The muhaddithun are very interested in this. Very interested in this. So let's say, for example, Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi is narrating a hadith. Okay? Most of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi's riwayat are khumasi. Some are ruba'i. He has 20 odd thulathis. 20, 23, something like this. How many? You guys know what a thulathi narration is? These are his golden chains. That means between him and the Prophet of Allah, there are how many narrators? 3. That means we have 3 generations there. That's what we're talking about, okay? Most of his riwayat are ruba'i and khumasi. Either 4 or 5 narrators. So let's go with the khumasi scenario. Let's go with ruba'i, make it easier, okay? So we have 4 generations that we've established of narrators here, okay? So how many people were narrating this hadith while this person is narrating it? That's a question. Does this whole hadith boil down to one sahabi? For example, we're starting from the top. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu is the one who narrates it, for example, or Umar radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Is he the only person that's narrating it? Or is this hadith being narrated by every sahabi? For example, the issue of the permissibility on wiping over cotton socks. Not cotton, leather socks, khuffain, masa' al-khuffain. The issue of the permissibility of wiping over leather socks is a mutawatir matter because it is narrated by over 70 sahaba. How many? 70. This is a very overkill issue. Everyone narrated it. Everyone narrated it. That we saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wiping over his khuffain, his leather socks. Now there are other narrations that you find it all boils down to one sahabi who said. Now that doesn't mean it's weak. Don't get that in your head. Don't jump to conclusions. I'm just trying to explain to you the scope of this. Now the muhaddith has to figure out, based off of multiple factors, what is he going to do? What impacts, what doesn't impact. That's them crafting. Right now I just want you to know what they're working with, what they're looking at, what angle they're studying it from. Now sometimes there are a bunch of sahaba that are narrating it, and there are many tabi'un narrating it, but when it comes to tabu'ut tabi'i, the 3rd generation, it boils down to maybe 2 guys. These 2 guys happen to narrate it. Everyone else, let's say for argument's sake, died. And only 2 people lived to narrate it. Or, as far as we have records, between the 4th generation and the 2nd generation, there are only 2 guys narrating it. The whole thing bottlenecks down to 2 people. You guys understand this? So we need to find out what's happening here. Because if you have a large group of people in every generation, what does that tell us?
It's strong.
This is really strong. This is very, very, very strong narration. Versus it bottlenecking down to one person. Again, just because it's one person does not make it, it does not make it weak. Do not jump to that conclusion. I had a conversation with someone in Toronto 2 weeks ago. It was a scholar actually. And this was his position. He said, every khabar wahid is da'if. And I said, what are you talking about? How does that make any sense? What are you saying about Bukhari? Sahih al-Bukhari is full of khabar wahid. Sahih Muslim is full of khabar wahid. Just because it boils down to one. Because look, if the whole thing boils down to one narrator, and let's say that one narrator is Umar radiallahu anh, it's still weak for you, buddy? We're interested in who that one person is too. Is that right? That first hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, there's only one narrator, one chain that it's actually authentically narrated from. And that one chain is through Umar radiallahu anh. All the other variations are weak. That one chain is, you're going to call it weak now? No, you can't. Of course you wouldn't. Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi's first and last hadith are both of the same nature. They both boil down to this one narrator. The first narration of Hussain Bukhari and also the kalimatani habibatan, that last narration as well. Okay, so that's the scope. Now let's look at the terminology. So we're starting with mutawatir. You guys see that word there? Mutawatir. The definition of mutawatir: a narration conveyed by narrators so numerous that it is inconceivable that they agreed upon an untruthful statement, thus accepted as unquestionable. A narration conveyed by narrators so many, so numerous, so many, that it is, what did I say? Inconceivable that they agreed upon an untruthful statement, upon a false statement. 70 people narrated it. And then the second generation, you have another 70 people. And then the next generation, you have another 70 people. And in the next generation, you have another 70 people. And you have, in every generation, you have this large number of people from different parts of the world narrating the exact same statement from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it is inconceivable that all these people conspired together to attribute a false statement to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You guys understand this? Thus, this narration is accepted as unquestionable. Mutawatir narrations are very authentic. Like super duper authentic. The Quran is mutawatir, the whole thing. The whole Quran is mutawatir. That's why when Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anh was appointed to compile the Quran, the written copy of the Quran by Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, he had such stringent and difficult conditions for people to submit their written verses into this written copy. He had to make sure it was mutawatir. Every verse that someone presented, someone said, I wrote this verse in front of the Prophet of Allah, he would say, show me 2 witnesses who saw you write it in front of the Prophet. He had to present those 2 witnesses. And then he would take that verse and present it to his committee of Huffaz, who are all there. Read the verse. Do you guys recall this verse the same way? Yes. He would then say, I also recall it the same way. Write it down. It had to be, every writing had to be, what did I say? Mutawatir. The entire Quran is mutawatir. Unquestionable. Unquestionable. I'm tempted to say something, but I shouldn't. Okay, let it go. I won't say it. Sheikh Amir has given me a task to accomplish today, and I have to accomplish that task, inshallah. No, don't bookmark it. Okay, now, what is that number of narrators we are looking for in every generation to make it mutawatir? I just said a large number, right? What is that number? Now, this is where the muhaddithun differ in opinion. Some went super hard and they said it has to be 70 people. We need that many. It has to be that many people for it to be considered mutawatir. Because if it's mutawatir, this is super duper real. Like, not just real, but this is very serious. This piece of information is, like, as far as legislating goes, it's up there with the Quran. As far as, what did I say? Legislating goes, it is taken very seriously. Anything that's mutawatir is taken very seriously. Okay? 70. Some say 40, others say 20, others say 5. So you can see there's a variation here. You were asking earlier about difference of opinion among muhaddithun. This is an example in terminology of hadith. What classifies a term, what doesn't? Here's an example. The difference on the number of people that need to be narrating it. Now, mutawatir falls into 2 categories, mutawatir lafzi and ma'nawi. Mutawatir lafzi, mutawatir in wording, is a hadith that is narrated in a manner that all the narrators are unanimous in reporting it with the exact same words. That you have a large group of people all narrating it, and they're all narrating it with one exact wording. What's the example of mutawatir lafzi? What's the narration that's an example of this? How beautiful is that? Right? Man kadhab, that's the narration. That's a cited example. Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan. Whoever lies upon me intentionally, فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ, should take his place in the fire of hell. Every Sahabi heard it. Go tell this to the Orientalists. Go tell them that this is a mutawatir narration. That Muslims took it very seriously from day one. You never attribute a false statement to Rasulullah Every Sahabi knew it. Every kid knew this narration. Every woman and man knew this narration. من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. Then there's mutawatir in meaning. Lafdhan, ma'nan, sorry. Mutawatir in meaning is a hadith that is narrated in a manner that all of the narrators are unanimous in narrating it with the same meaning while using different words. For example, all of the Sahaba narrating they saw the tree cry. You guys know that incident? Yeah. The Sahaba narrating they saw the tree cry. Rasulullah ﷺ stepped away from the tree and stood on the pulpit and gave his khutbah, and they said, we heard a noise from that tree that was crying, that Nabi ﷺ used to lean on. So Nabi ﷺ went and calmed it down, and then they cut the tree and buried it there. So this is like an example of that. Everyone saw, they didn't use their own words, but everyone saw the same thing. They witnessed it. Now a hadith that is not mutawatir is considered to be khabar wahid. That's how we're going to define this. Don't get caught by wahid. What does wahid mean? One. Don't focus on that. Don't get fooled by that. You'll make a big mistake there. Do not think of wahid and one and say one narrator. Don't make that mistake. Okay? What did I say to you right now? How do we define khabar wahid? If it's not mutawatir, then it's going to be khabar wahid. That's how we're going to define it. Now khabar wahid divides down into three categories. The highest and strongest from that is mashhur. This refers to a hadith conveyed by three or more narrators in the history of that narration. Three or more. What's the cutoff point for it to become mutawatir? 5 or 20 or 40 or 70. You know that difference of opinion we had? So depending on that. Depending on that, we will know whether it's mutawatir or not, depending on what position a person takes. Khabar aziz, number 2, is a hadith conveyed by two narrators at any point in its isnad. If, for example, at any point it boils down to just two people. So let's say generation 1, 20, 30, 40, 2, 60. You guys see that? It was almost mutawatir all throughout, but what happened? At some point it hit 2. Now what happens? Aziz. Second scenario, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. What is this? Still Aziz. At any point, if any part of the chain hits this number, hits 3, what happens? Mashhur. Then from 3, if it drops to 2, Aziz. Let's say it didn't drop to 2, it just stayed at 3 and then went back up to 10. Mashhur. You guys understand how that works? And then khabar gharib is where it boils down to just one narrator. Historically, many groups have tried to discredit and disregard khabar wahid. They've tried to say, if it's not mutawatir, we won't act upon it. This is unfortunately a sly approach to discredit all the hadith. Because in comparison to mutawatir are few narrations. Not few as in just a few, but it's not like volumes and volumes and volumes of mutawatir narrations. They're still limited. Most of the narrations are khabar wahid. They fall somewhere within this 3, 2, 1 narrators. You guys understand that? So what they try to do is that they say if a narration is khabar wahid, we're not going to accept it. That's basically saying what? We're rejecting 70% of the narrations of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who is a giant and legend in the science of hadith, he says, the Sahaba and Tabi'un used to follow khabar wahid as evidence, thus it is an evidence. You guys understand? If even one Sahabi narrated something, they accepted it. They didn't require 3 or 4 companions to narrate it. Umar radiallahu anhu would ask for verification. That wasn't because he didn't accept a narration from one person, but those cases, like the riwayah in Sahih Muslim, where he asked Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu for further verification, it wasn't because he questioned him. He doubted him as a narrator. Rather, he wanted to set the record straight that we will hold people accountable when they say the Prophet of Allah said something. Otherwise, there are many examples where the Sahaba, in their moments of uncertainty, one Sahabi would say, I heard the Prophet of Allah say this, and they would settle the matter right there. I think an easy example of this would be when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, and the Ansar gathered together, and they were talking about who should be the next Khalifa. This is right, moments after the Prophet passed away, just very soon after. Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, Umar radiallahu anh, Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anh, three of them went there right away. And they said, what's going on? They said, we're appointing the Khalifa. So Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh said, I heard the Prophet of Allah saying, Al-a'immatu min Quraysh. And all of the Ansar immediately accepted that the leader will be yours. The Prophet of Allah said, Al-a'immatu, the leader will be from Quraysh. So right away, they accepted it. This is an example of khabar wahid. From their perspective, who's narrating this riwayah? One person. Who is that one person though? Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, that's a solid one guy. That's an MVP right there. Okay? That narration, there's an explanation to it. That's not the scope of today's discussion. That's not what we're talking about right now. Just understand that. Okay? So we've covered this. That's done. Now, authenticity. This is the fun part. This is what everyone wants to know. Is that right? Yes or no? You guys probably came here to find out what's sahih, what's da'if. What's all this? What is all this? Okay. Now the first thing when I teach this, the scope of this discussion, I think it's straightforward. If a statement is authentic, if you can establish it's authentic, its importance in the eyes of the jurists increase significantly. They are very interested in knowing what happened, if it's an authentic report, if it meets all their conditions. There's a lot of conditions, so brace yourself. Okay, I'm going to cover some of them right now, but don't get exhausted, stick with me. And if you don't remember any of it, that's okay. I just want you to at least appreciate the process. And next time you hear someone say a hadith is sahih, thank Allah that there were people who went through the detailed process of verifying every single narration. Just thank Allah for that you are a part of a tradition of people who worked hard. We are not from an ummah of lazy people who just showed up and took everything for granted and said, you know what? Okay. They put the work into it. They really did. Okay, so that's the scope of evaluation. Now, before we even go into the terms, there are a few things that I want to say to you guys. The opposite of a hadith, this is not technical, just stick with what I'm saying. Listen to me, okay? Either something is a hadith or not a hadith. Is that clear? If something is not a hadith, we call it mawdu'. That means this is not a hadith. I would even think that we should not even say the word hadith mawdu'. We should just say mawdu'. Why even dignify that statement with the word hadith? If it's mawdu', mawdu' means fabricated, something created, something made up. Mawdu' is not even a hadith. Is that clear? The way people act towards da'if hadith, they should actually be acting like that towards mawdu' hadith. That's the attitude. You know how some people treat weak narrations as if they don't exist? That's not how your attitude should be. That attitude should be, your attitude should be like that for, which one? Mawdu'. Why is that? It has nothing to do with anything. So people fabricated narrations all the time. Shawiruhunna wa khalifuhunna. Take advice from your wives and do the exact opposite of what they say. It's not a hadith. It has nothing to do with hadith. This is an offensive statement that is absolutely fabricated, and I don't even think we should dignify that term by adding the word hadith before it. But we do from the perspective that it's a supposed report. And because it's been submitted as a report, now the muhaddithun have to put it through the ringer. And this one was a dud. You guys understand? The muhaddithun put everything through the ringer. Everything's got to go through the ringer. Let's see what it is. Let's see what it is. Put it through. Let's see if it stands or not. And this one is what it is?
It's a dud. There are entire books dedicated to mawdu' narrations. I have a 4-volume book at home. Every narration in there is fabricated. They're hilarious. This is Shawkani's book. That's all I'll tell you. He has a book on fabricated narrations. Shall I tell you how I got possession of this book? So we used to go for Hajj. So when I would go, one of the things that we would enjoy doing as students was just going. They used to have before they turned Makkah into what it is right now, like all these 5-star hotels everywhere. If you went like in the 90s, you might remember, or like even the early 2000s, mid to early 2000s, there would be like these small little gullies, streets everywhere, and they had these like mom and pop stores everywhere, and so many bookstores, and each of those bookstores were gems, like mines of just knowledge. So what I would do, you can call me a nerd if you want to, but I really loved it. After Fajr Salah, when the stores would open up at 9, 10 o'clock, I would go to the bookstores. And the guy in the bookstore would get really angry if you sat there without buying, but we'd do it anyway. We'd just sit there, and because these were like books that at that time PDF wasn't a thing, and the internet wasn't much of a thing anyway. So you just sit there like, wow, I'm getting to touch Shawkani's work, like it's a big deal, you know? I didn't know that I would get a chance to hold this book in my life. It was a thing, just trust me. So one time I was in one of the libraries, Maktab Ibn Abbas. There used to be a famous one there. That was one of my top ones. I used to go there and I was reading through books. And then I saw this book there of Shawkani that was all on fabricated narrations. And I picked it up and I laughed for 45 minutes straight. It was just funny. And I was like, oh my God, this is a great comedy book. It's a good book for humor, and I bought it for that intention. Astaghfirullah. I actually bought that book with the intention that it's going to make me laugh. But then I realized when I got to the hotel that was a very bad intention. These are all offensive statements attributed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I still kept the book because now I was able to know that these statements are, at least according to a large group of muhaddithun, these are not acceptable narrations, and you should be careful when you're around them. Is that clear? This is important. So hadith and non-hadith. Non-hadith is mawdu'. Now that we're talking about hadith, that means this statement in some meaningful way is still connected to the Prophet. If it was disconnected from the Prophet 100% and muhaddithun said there is nothing here, they wouldn't let it be da'if. What would they do, guys? It would get pushed down. And what's the next category down? Mawdu'. Now that's where they would completely disown it. Is that clear? Okay. Now, there are 3 terms that I'm going to offer you, cover with you right now. So mawdu' you already have. I already explained that to you. Now the 3 on top. I'm going to give super simple definitions, then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. Sahih, authentic. Sahih, how are we defining this? Authentic. Hasan has minor defects. Da'if has major defects. Is that clear? So what did we say? Sahih is? I'll talk about what makes something authentic. That's the next discussion. What are the conditions? 5 conditions for Sahih. We'll come to that shortly. If there are minor defects, what's it called? And major defects? Da'if. Everyone's good? Now the upgrade process. What do you call an upgraded mawdu' narration? Nothing. It's a lie. You can't upgrade a lie. A lie will always be a lie, period. A weak narration, major defects, da'if, can be upgraded. Okay? What happens? A weak narration, what did I say? How the upgrade occurs is if there is ta'addud al-turuq. Ta'addud al-turuq means there are 20 people all saying the same thing, but each of these 20 narrations have major defects. Do you guys understand that? 20 narrations are all saying the same thing, that this happened. But each one independently has major defects. So the class is that it's weak. But because there are so many narrations saying that, what we call ta'addud al-turuq, multiple paths, it gets an upgrade. That da'if narration gets an, what did I say? Upgrade. The upgrade for a da'if narration is actually called Hasan li ghayrihi. What do they call it? Meaning we've allowed it to enter into the Hasan category, not because of its own merit, but due to the merit of other supporting chains. You guys with me? You have to give me some feedback, otherwise I can't do this all day. I can't keep asking you guys. You get it?
Yes.
Okay. Now if you have a Hasan narration, Hasan, minor defects, it can also get upgraded. Same process. How does upgrade occur? Ta'addud al-turuq. So there are 10 chains, 10 narrations all saying the same thing. But each narration independently has a minor defect. So that narration then gets upgraded to the category. The upgrade for Hasan is called Sahih li ghayrihi. It's now borderlining what category? Sahih. But what do they call it? Sahih li ghayrihi. Sahih li ghayrihi. Hold right there. Keep that thought. I'm going to come right to you. Like 30 seconds. I have to say one statement. Okay, you guys understand that? Sahih li ghayrihi. You know how I said multiple chains? One thing you have to keep in mind. According to the muhaddithun, if there is a chain with a matan, even if one narrator changes, they consider that a new narration. So when we say there are hundreds of thousands of narrations, that doesn't mean there are hundreds and thousands of matans, that means there are hundreds of thousands of sanads. You guys understand this? As far as mutun, unique mutun go, there aren't that many. You won't pass, and I'm going to just exaggerate here, 30,000. Just exaggerate. I just exaggerated there. You won't, unique mutun, unique text, you won't cross how many? How did we reach hundreds of thousands? 500,000, 1 million narrations. Imam Abu Dawud had memorized 500,000. How did we get to 500,000 from 30,000? Every time the sanad changes, they consider that a new riwayah. Every time the sanad changes, even a small change in the sanad, what do we consider that as? It's its own riwayah. It's its own entry. It's its own entry. The narration has to be done independently. We're going to deal with you all over again. We're going to put you through the ringer all over again because there's a variation. Every time a small change occurs, we don't include it in the same file. What do? You get your own ticket number, your own file, you start all over again. You see how delicate the muhaddithun are? How much work is that, man? If it was me, what would I do? Put it all into one, we'll make it one big case file, and then go for a barbecue on the weekend. Volleyball's not going to play itself. The ball needs help as well. It has huquq over me, right? But these muhaddithun, when I say they gave their lives to it, and I put sweat and blood into it, when I said that at the beginning, it wasn't a joke. Each one independent. So now you understand the ta'addud al-turuq concept, inshallah. That probably makes sense now, that when I say multiple chains corroborating, because every time there's even a small alteration of the chain, they consider it to be new riwayah. Now what's your statement?
I think my question was answered, but it's like the defects would be different among...
They could be the same, they could be different. That's a different discussion. But if right now, I'm not even talking about what constitutes to a major or minor defect. That's beyond the scope of tonight. But I use this word, I use this terminology intentionally, knowing that it's vague. For Hasan, what did I say? Minor defects. For Da'if, what did I say? Major defects. That's as far as we're going. We're not going beyond that. Okay? So now you guys understand mawdu', inshallah. You understand? Da'if. What's Da'if? And then what happens to upgrade? How does the upgrade happen? Multiple chains. And then the one above that's called Hasan. What's Hasan? And then the upgrade from there is called Sahih li ghayrihi. And then you have Sahih. Let's talk about Sahih. How does a narration become Sahih? In order for a narration to be Sahih, 5 things must be met. Number 1, each narrator in the chain must have adala. Adala means they must have integrity. Another way of looking at integrity is a simple word, easier word, trustworthy. Reliable people. Now, what does it mean to be reliable? Huh? Who's judging? Good question. Muhaddithin don't leave things open-ended. When they say adala, it means something. This is a technical term. This is not just a loose statement that what are you feeling about this guy? I don't like him. You like him? No, I don't like him too much either, I like that guy, let him in. It's not like some sort of club bouncer. That's not what this is. For them, integrity means something. In order for integrity to exist, 5 things must be absent. If any of these 5 things are present, so within the 5 condition, point number 1 has 5 other considerations. Every chain, they did this for every narrator. You guys have to appreciate how big of a deal this is. There's a reason why there was a whole generation of people, and I told you at the beginning, Allah gave these people to us as a gift. They function at a level human beings cannot function. Most programs that are programmed by human beings can't function this well. These guys worked miraculously. Allah's fadl, alhamdulillah. So number 1, integrity. And for the integrity to count, 5 things must be, what did I say? Absent. What are these 5 things? Number 1, kadhib. What was that? Yeah, kadhib. But we can't, just write them down. I'll explain each one. Number 1, what did I say? You have them in front of you? Oh, it's right there. What compromises integrity? Very good. Okay, let's cover that. Let's just jump over to that page. I'll explain all these things to you, and then we'll come back. Okay? Kadhib. Number 2, ittiham bil kadhib. Now bear in mind, kadhib in Arabic means what? Lying. Ittiham bil kadhib means to be accused of lying. This is not supposed to be taken linguistically. There is a meaning to each of these. Each of these terms refer to something. You can't just take them. Kadhib is someone who has been proven to lie in hadith, not in their life. We don't care. That's another story. Someone that has proven to lie in, what did I say? In hadith. We have seen this person lie in hadith. Ittiham bil kadhib means someone that has been proven to lie in general. You guys understand this? Outside of hadith. If someone narrated and lied in a hadith, what do they consider this to be? Kadhib. And number 2 is ittiham bil kadhib. Ittiham bil kadhib does not mean accused of lying. That's how we translate it literally. What are the muhaddithun referring to here? In general. This dude lied to his children. This dude lies here. This dude lies there. If they saw someone lying in life, that would be a red flag for them. Okay? Bear in mind, if all of these things exist, that person becomes an authentic narrator. Let's say there is no kadhib, but there's ittiham bil kadhib. He may fall down to Hassan, minor defect. You guys see that? Not enough to write him off, but what are we going to do? We're going to bump him down a little. Very careful. Very careful. We could let it all just go. But no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to be true to our tradition and make sure it's classified right. It has to be classified properly. Because based off of how it's classified, the jurists will then use it to legislate, and that will impact people's akhirah. This is going to impact policy, practice for an entire generation of people till the end of days. So we have to make sure everything is properly classified. Ittiham bil kadhib. Number 3, is fisq. Fisq refers to moral corruption. What that means here, moral corruption, again, what does that mean? This person did not have good deeds. He did things contradictory to Sharia. You know how we say, mind your own business and don't judge me? Oh, you wouldn't last with the muhaddithun in 1 hour. Super judgy dudes. Super duper. That was their job, to pass judgment. Someone asked me, is it okay? What are your thoughts on this statement, don't judge? I said, as a policy for people who are not judges and have no say in other people's life, it's probably a better statement. It's a good statement. That if you have no impact on someone else's life, and they have no impact on your life, and you're not a judge yourself, then there really isn't much benefit in passing judgment on someone. You should surely pass judgment on the action, though. right? And that is by a secondary nature passing judgment on the individual as well, because there's a connection between the individual and their action. We can't deny that. But on the other side, for people who don't do things in line with Sharia, to feel arrogant and entitled to say that I will do whatever sin I want to and you can't pass judgment on me or hold a position on my action, that seems a tad bit arrogant and rich as well. You understand this? Because if we stop passing judgment on people's actions, then we will lose our sight of what is an objective truth and what is an objective false. This idea of don't judge me seems to lean more towards creating a subjective code of morality. That is very dangerous. Very dangerous. Morality from an Islamic perspective is not subjective. It's quite objective, actually. It's quite objective. A person can be a fasiq. I know we don't like saying that. The jurists do it, though. They say it. Not just one madhab, all the madahib. For them, a fasiq is someone who misses something that is wajib. If something is wajib upon you, something is mandatory upon you in any legal sense, or you repeatedly, intentionally, without any consideration, dismiss the sunnah, all of that, everything I just said. What did I say? Repeatedly, intentionally, without consideration, miss the sunnah, they call that person a fasiq. And then they say, a fasiq should not be appointed as imam. Can he lead salah? He can. But he shouldn't be appointed as imam. Two different things. There's a person that's a fasiq. He shouldn't lead the salah. The people should not appoint him. They shouldn't appoint their imam. They shouldn't hire someone at ISM who is a known fasiq. You shouldn't hire someone like that. That person is not suitable to stand where the imam is standing. And fisq is when they do it openly, not privately. Privately, what they do, that's between them and their Allah. So if someone's looking at pornography, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, but if it's private, it's between you and your Allah. But if you're watching that stuff in the parking lot, that is a big problem. You need to be removed from the position on behalf of the ummah. This is important. However, now, a group of people have gathered together, he stands up to lead salah. You can lead. We shouldn't protest. Let him lead. Because the Prophet said, Sallu khalfa kulla barrin wa fajir. That when it comes to salah, whoever is leading, you pray behind them. There are political implications to this statement of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. So, again, we were talking about morality and judgment on morality. The muhaddithun do it a lot. If your team don't judge, these are people you want to stay away from. This is not your crew. What number is it now? 4, jahala. This is when a person in the chain has a hidden identity. There's a person in the chain that has, what's an example of this? What was that? Serial killer. Oh, that's a dark one. Hidden identity. You guys are thinking too much, man. It's simple. Give me easy example. Easy example is that, ذهبت إلى دمشق ولقيت رجلا قال سمعت عمر رضي الله عنه يقول. I went to Damascus and I met a man who said, I heard Umar رضي الله عنه saying. مجهول. رجل مجهول. We don't have a name identifying it. What do we have here? A vague description. لقيني رجل من التابعين وقال, like that. You know what I mean? I met a person from the tabi'is who said this. So the example of jahala would be a man related to me, a woman related to me, someone related to me. Somebody said. We heard our elders saying. That's a dhaif narration. Why? Because we don't know who these elders are. Right? As far as sanad goes, doesn't mean you can't say that. I'm just saying as far as sanad goes, muhaddithun would be skeptical of that statement because we need to know who said it so we can trace it all back, make it all work. I want you to really think about like modern day journalism as we're talking about this and thank Allah for the muhaddithun again. Like really. Western societies are very proud of their free press. What good is your free press if it doesn't have any meaningful system to it? Again, I'm not like taking a shot of all of press. I'm not saying that. There are some very hardworking people that have put their life on the line to deliver the truth. And whatever their outcomes are, they deserve our respect for being amazing human beings. And this is, dil ki baat keh raha hu. I'm telling you with my heart. But the rest of what we see, most of what we see online is what? It's just trash. You know the greatest example of how bad the West has journalism, and if I may say, how bad the West is at riwayat? Should I tell you guys? Follow the news during the transfer windows. You know, every sport has a transfer window, right? For basketball, for soccer, for football. If you follow the news during the transfer window, what happens? No one? Really? It's just all rumors. It's all it is. So Ronaldo might be talking to this group, and reporters say that they saw this guy having lunch with that guy, and then this guy, he winked at that guy, and sab bakwas kharafat, all this meaningless garbage. All this is, you know what bakwas is? Yeah. It's all kharafat. All of it is kharafat. Is it called TMZ? Is that what it's called? Is that what it's called, TMZ? Sana Hamdan knows. She'll tell you more about it later on, inshallah. It's all just so bad, so bad. Paparazzi culture, so bad. All of this is an example of why we need muhaddithun. We need the likes of Abu Zura al-Razi, Abu Hatim al-Razi. We need the likes of Bukhari to come in and school CNN, BBC, all these guys on how to do their job right. We are the OGs. We will teach you how it's done. This is how you narrate. This is how you verify. This is how you have statements that are actually actionable. Allah reward them. And the last one is bid'ah. Bid'ah here refers to corrupt beliefs. This is important. So according to the Sunnis, Shias are in this category. You understand that? The Khawarij and Mu'tazila, the Qadariyah would be in this category. So note, what did I say? Corruption in beliefs. This is an important one. Just because someone has corruption in belief does not mean that they are disregarded. It can't be simple. Because then the muhaddithun look at the grade of their corruption and whether their corruption in belief would actually impact their narration. Is it possible that someone is a Christian and truthful? Yes or no? Yeah. So now they're interested in knowing, what is this Christian narrating? If he's narrating a narration proving that Jesus is the Son of God, what are the muhaddithun going to say? You sneaky guy. I see what you're doing here. But if he's narrating that I heard the Imam say that you cannot park in the handicapped spot in Jum'ah Salah, it's an acceptable narration. He's a trustworthy guy. Even if his beliefs are corrupt, we can still accept from him. You guys understand this? Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi narrates in his Sahih from many Shi'i narrators. Many of them. And this was his principle. He said, I will accept narrations from them as long as they have the other conditions all in place. They are not extreme in their belief. I will accept if they are tafdili Shias, and as long as they don't narrate in chapters that have to do with their unique belief to promote their agenda. Okay? Again, these are discussions outside the scope of this class, but I'm trying to give you a feel for it, feed you a little information so you understand what's happening in the back end here. So that's that. Now, let's go back. Precision. So we go back to the previous one. Dhabt is done. Adala is done. Number 2, precision. The narrator must have precision. What that means is they must have, in Arabic, what we call dhabt. What happened? You have to take a break now? Nahin yaar. Let's finish off the chapter. Yeah. What time does the class end? Okay, well, no, we'll finish. Dhabt. Dhabt is what? What did I say? Their accuracy when narrating something. Dhabt is of 2 types. Dhabt al-hifadha wa dhabt al-kitaba. There is the person's accuracy in memorizing things, meaning from memory they can narrate things accurately. Okay? And the dhabt al-kitaba is that when they write something, What they write accurately represents what was said. Okay? What are things that disqualify a person's dhabt? If you go to the next page, I have 4 things listed there. What disqualifies a person's dhabt? Number 1, they frequently have memory errors. That doesn't mean they're bad. It could just mean they're getting old. Literally, muhadithun, they do this. They say that we will accept narrations from this narrator before he arrived to Egypt because when he got there, he was very old, he started making mistakes. But that same person, when he was in Sham, there are no proofs of him having delusions, we will accept it. That has nothing to do with the person, like their integrity. That doesn't make them a bad person. This is a result of what? Old age. This happens a lot in hadith, and the muhadithun are very clear about it. We will accept this person's narrations until this point. Thereafter, we stop accepting their narrations. This isn't like a one-off thing. This happens a lot, and they have clear documentation and proof for each one. Lengthy files. That these people at this point, their narrations are questionable. We have to corroborate them. We have to find other proof to establish what they said in this language. Number 2 is delusion, wahm. Number 3 is poor memory, meaning overall they just have poor memory. And number 4 is contradicting reliable narrators. That this person frequently contradicts people that are reliable in narration. This guy he's a guy who's narrating, and he's clearly contradicting all the time people that are solid tier 1 narrators. Imam Muslim rahmatullahi alayhi divides narrators in this regard into 3 categories, but that's another discussion. You don't need to write that down. Okay, let's continue. And then what's next? We go back, muttasil, continuity. Continuity means, you know how earlier I said there are 4 links in the chain of Bukhari? Rubai narrations? Continuity means that each of these 4 people are explicitly mentioned by name or by kunya, meaning these guys are identified. Narrator 1, 2, 3, or 4, no one's missing. If a person's missing, it's no longer muttasil. Is that clear? Yes or no? Every chain has to be present for it to be muttasil. And I'm going to talk about this more in the next slide, because the next thing is about omissions, and omissions and ittisal are connected. If a sanad is not muttasil, it is a big red flag in its authenticity. If a person is missing in the chain, that is a big red flag, very big red flag. It's almost like, according to the muhadithun, it's very difficult to make that narration sahih. There are some cases, I give you the Hasan al-Basri example, where they make exceptions. The marasil of Hasan al-Basri, the marasil of Sa'id al-Musayyib and others, they are exceptions. But for the most part, like 90% of the time, if there's a person missing, what are the muhadithun doing? They're moving it. You won't be allowed. This is a very big one for them. They don't accept if there's inqita in a narration. They're very serious about this matter. And then the next one is, it is free of hidden flaws. Ilal. I call them hidden flaws. We call them hidden flaws because the average eye can't see these. These are where you need masters. You know how I told Abu Zur'a al-Razi would be able to identify if 2 narrators possibly didn't even meet? That's a hidden defect. And the average eye wouldn't know, because the 2 lived at the same time. But he, as a master, knows because of his detailed knowledge that these people, they did not meet. So an example of a hidden defect, for example, although the 2 narrators are contemporaries, the 2 narrators could not have met. This is called a hidden defect. At surface, you wouldn't see it. Only that person would know who? Bolo. Who really knows the subject. Who really knows the science. And the last one, the hadith is free of irregularity. Adam al-shudud. It is free of irregularity. Irregularity means it does not contradict a more established and more authentic narration. It does not contradict a more established and authentic narration. Okay, now we continue to the omissions part, because I talked about briefly. Where is it gone? There we go. We've talked about omissions quite a few times. The scope of this discussion, we've already covered that. I think I covered it at the beginning. What's the scope of this discussion? What was that? If anyone's left out. What's the scope of that? What if someone is left out? That has serious implications on it being muttasil, and therefore compromises it being sahih. right? If someone's missing, it's not muttasil. Muttasil we just covered a few moments ago, right? Just right now. And if it's not muttasil, what happens? It's a big red flag. That is a problem. So we need to know who's missing, how many people are missing, what's going on here. Naturally, the more people are missing, what happens? Like its chances start tanking. One person's a problem. 3 people missing, what happens? This just went right down the chute. It went right down. I'm telling you honestly. If there's a riwayah, one person, like a guy from the 4th century says the Prophet of Allah said something, just like that, the muhaddithun are going to give it 0 attention. They're just going to take it, put it aside. You know what I mean? And in some cases, it could even be classed as fabricated. There are, again, considerations. So now, muttasil is a chain in which all the narrators are present. None of the narrators are omitted from the chain. That's how we define muttasil. Everyone is there. A connected narration, a continuous chain. Munqati'. If one or more narrators are missing from a chain, it's a broken chain, incomplete chain. Okay, now before I go into the 3 different types of munqati', I want you to quickly look at this sample chain that we have here. This is a really good example. It's a ruba'i narration. This is a ruba'i narration. Sheikh Amir put this chain together. Did you choose this one?
I wish I could take credit, but it came from your
Okay. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Okay. This is a ruba'i narration of Imam Bukhari rahmatullahi alayhi. Look at it carefully. Imam Bukhari and then his teacher and then tabi'i and then his teacher, tabi'i, sahabi. 4 people. Ruba'i. I want you to look at that for a moment. A mursal narration is when the tabi'i skips the sahabi and narrates directly from the Prophet. So what you're doing here, do this for me. Everyone put their finger on the sahabi, cover that block. You guys put your finger on the sahabi, cover it. That is a mursal narration. You understand? Imagine that block is missing. So Hassan al-Basri is a tabi'i, that's an example. If he narrates by saying Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that riwayah is considered what? It's munqata. But what type of inqita is there? It's mursal. So when we say someone narrated it mursalan, that means a tabi'i skipped a sahabi and went directly to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Mu'allaq. The last narrator in the chain skips his teacher. So now, put your finger on his teacher. You know where it says his teacher? Put your finger on that one. Imagine Imam Bukhari narrating from a tabi'ut tabi'i. So what do we call this scenario? Mu'allaq. You know what would make this even better? If we put numbers on there. That would just make it even a little bit more sweeter. You get it? If Imam Bukhari was like, if the Prophet was number 1, obviously he is number 1. And then Sahabi 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like imagine 5 was missing. That would make it a little better for you so that you can always connect it back to your statement. If you guys want to do that, go ahead and number them. If you want to, just for your own sake. So put next to the Prophet write 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 there. And then for Mursal, you would say number 2 is missing. You get it? And for Mu'allaq, what would be missing? 5. And for Mu'dal, skipping 2 or more narrators from the isnad. Skipping 2 or more narrators from the isnad. You know why I mentioned those two, Mu'allaq and Mursal? Because these are common. They're actually quite common. Not super common, but it happens. For example, I might skip my teacher and say, Sheikh Zakaria rahimahullah ta'ala said something. I clearly never met him in my life. He passed away before I was born. Alhamdulillah. But I skip my teacher. Sometimes people skip their teacher's name and go to the teacher above them out of affection and love for that other teacher. just to show proximity and closeness. And they know that their students know that I didn't hear from him directly. It was a practice. It was a common practice among muhaddithun, that they would just narrate from a teacher above. Okay, so that's why there's a mu'allaq. Mu'allaq is skipping on this side, mursal is skipping on that side, and the other terminology that I think is important for you to know is mu'dal. What does that mean? Skipping two or more. Now obviously you're just looking at that chain there. Are there other possibilities? Yeah. Skipping one here, one there. The two that are skipping are missed together versus two on this. Each one has a different term. And we're not going to cover those, but each one has a different term. So that deals with the omission part. We have this last slide here. Last page, I should say. This looks like one page. It's a 1 hour lecture. Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani, rahimahullah, I mean, may Allah prolong his life. His father passed away, but he's alive. May Allah give him a long life. He wrote a book called The Authority of the Sunnah. It's a very important book to read. In his book, sorry, give me 1 second. Let me open this up. I said I won't read my notes, and I won't, but I just want to have them open anyway in case I feel like there's something I really want to put in there.
What was that book by, you said?
Mufti Muhammad Taqi Uthmani. Oh, is that one? There we go. So in his book, Authority of the Sunnah, he says that after dealing with hadith rejectors and critics throughout his life, I have summarized all of their arguments to mainly represent three main issues. That hadith rejectors, he said, most of their arguments boil down to how many issues? Three issues. Number one, they accept wahi matlu, but reject wahi ghayr matlu. That's the first position that I've seen in them. What that means is, wahi matlu refers to the Quran. They say, we accept the Quran. No, hands down. But this whole hadith business, we don't accept that. I already dealt with this right at the beginning of our class, by the way. I started with this point. They say we accepted the hadith Quran, but we don't accept the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a fascinating claim, considering that if you accept the Quran, what is the Quran telling you to do? Follow the Prophet. So bam, you're owned. And that's a really easy one-move checkmate. I have found this matter to be, Allah forgive me if I'm wrong here. I know I'm not wrong. But I'm surprised by how obvious the matter is and how people miss it. I say I'm not wrong because I'm confident in it. The Quran does say obey the Prophet. There's no question about that. I'm not wrong there. No one's wrong. We all believe this and we're right. But it's amazing how people don't see it. And it's not in one place. How many places in the Quran is Allah telling us to obey the Prophet, listen to him, follow his judgment? I mean, if you turn away from what the Prophet says, this punishment will come upon you. All in the Quran, by the way. How many times does that happen? It's like way too many. It's almost on every juz, in some juz, multiple times that message is there. Okay. Still, some people missed it, and I'm just dumbfounded by how such a clear message was not understood. May Allah protect us from becoming like that. You know, that something's so clear. It's not even like we're inferring it. It's explicit. It's direct. It's very clear cut. And still people don't see it. May Allah give us tawfiq and protect us that becomes our affair. However, you say that the Prophet's words and his statements have no legislative impact at all. The only point of legislation is the Quran. Well, now you have a problem. We're going to deal with that problem. That's their claim. You guys understand their claim? Hadith is not legislative in any nature. It has no legal impact. Only Quran does. So then we say, explain this. In Surah Baqarah, ayah number 143. Remember this ayah. This is a very important argument. Very important dalil. And if you're wondering where this fits into our worksheet here, the fourth one. And it says fourth argument, argument number 4. I'm starting with argument number 4. That's where I'm going to start. Now, before I present the argument, I already gave you the ayah number, right? I already gave you the ayah. 143 of Surah Baqarah. 143. Before I explain what's happening, I have to one more time repeat. Their claim is we accept Quran, that's the only revelation, there is no other form of revelation, nothing the Prophet ﷺ did had any legislative nature. We say that claim contradicts the Quran. How does it contradict the Quran? Because Surah Baqarah 143. Pull up the ayah if you can. I can't see, but so when it's up, let me know. It's up? Okay, while they're pulling it up, let me give you a little backdrop. In the early days of Islam, Muslims used to face Masjid al-Aqsa for Salah. Is that correct? Even after the Prophet of Allah arrived in Medina for almost 17, 18 months, they continued facing in which direction? Masjid al-Aqsa. And then in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the changing of the Qibla. In these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reverses, and when it changes the Qibla, which direction are we told now to face? Mecca. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الْقِبْلَةَ الَّتِي كُنْتَ عَلَيْهَا. We did not appoint the Qibla that you were on. That means the first Qibla that the Muslims were facing was appointed by who? By Allah. The first Qibla that the Prophet ﷺ was facing was appointed by Allah. Says وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الْقِبْلَةَ الَّتِي كُنْتَ عَلَيْهَا. We did not appoint the first Qibla that you were facing, but, and then the ayah continues. In this first part, Allah attests to appointing that first Qibla himself to the Prophet ﷺ. Is that right? Now, then the Qibla was changed. The Qibla being changed, Allah commanded the Prophet to face Kaaba is in the Quran. Show us the verse where Allah said to face Masjid al-Aqsa. If you say there is no other form of revelation, and that all commands of Allah are explicitly, exclusively in the Quran and nowhere else, then this ayah is faulty. Because that command does not exist anywhere in the Quran. Facing Masjid al-Aqsa was done by the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah revealed it to him, he then commanded it to mankind. So the early Muslims faced that direction first, and then the second hukum is mentioned in the Quran. And therefore, and there are other examples like this too. He also cites Surah Baqarah 187, فَالْآنَ بَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَابْتَغُوا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. The first hukum is not in the Quran, the second hukum is in the Quran. It's the same thing again. But Allah acknowledges in that ayah, Baqarah 187, that there was a previous hukum. But that previous hukum is not mentioned in the Quran. Similarly, in Surah Tahrim, verse number 3, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, نَبَّأَنِيَ الْعَلِيمُ الْخَبِيرُ, that Allah informed me. Nowhere in the Quran is there a mention of Allah informing him. That happened outside of the Quran, yet the Quran acknowledges that interaction, that there was revelation that occurred from Allah to His Prophet. And that revelation is referenced in Surah Tahrim, verse number 3, but not found in the Quran. What we deduce from all three of these examples that there was a second form of revelation that occurred, which was the hadith, what we call wahi ghayr matlud, the unrecited hadith. The unrecited revelation. How are we on time? 2 minutes left. Okay. The Quranic mandate on obeying the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Honestly, I don't. This is one of those things. I'm sorry if I sound dumbfounded. I am. I don't know where to start on this one. Where do you want me to start? Which ayah do you want me to start with? That's what I mean. Okay? But for those of you who aren't as acquainted with the Quran on this command, I will share some references with you. Surah Muhammad, verse number 33. Surah Anfal, verse number 1. Surah Anfal, verse number 20. Surah An-Nisa, 80. Surah An-Nisa, 59. Surah An-Nisa, 65. Surah Ahzab, 36. Surah Nur, 47. Surah Nur 63. Surah Nur 63 is a strong one. Because in Surah Nur 63, Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. That those people who contradict the command of the Prophet of Allah should be afraid that Allah's punishment and wrath will afflict them. فَلْيَحْذَرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. I told you Ahzab 36, that's another strong dalil. وما كان لمؤمن ولا مؤمنة إذا قضى الله ورسوله أمرا أن يكون لهم الخيرة من أمرهم. That after Allah and His Messenger, إذا قضى الله ورسوله, after Allah and His Messenger have decreed a matter, you have no say. أن يكون لهم الخيرة. There is no say for you in this matter at all. من أمرهم. ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد ضل ضلالا مبينا. That person has gone wrong, led astray, whoever disobeys Allah and His Messenger. Okay. Then we have, I already explained the clarification of the Quran requires hadith. We started with that today, okay? That the hadith is an explanation to that. And the last one is, our need for guidance is greater than the Sahaba. What that means, if you're wondering what that means, if you look at the second argument that Mufti Taqi Uthmani presents at the top, hadith, they say the first one was reject the unrecited revelation. I explained that, right? The second argument he says most hadith rejectors boil down to is the hadith were authoritative for Sahaba only, not for us. That hadith was a thing, they concede. Yes, hadith was a thing. It was legislative. It was a form of revelation. However, it was only authority on them, not on us, because we are very sophisticated modern human beings, and they were camel jockeys who lived in deserts, and they were Bedouins, so his statement was only legislative on them, not on us. I find that offensive. Why? Because that means you're saying he was a prophet for them, not for us. That doesn't make me feel close to the prophet. That doesn't make me feel like his follower. You guys understand this? Our Nabi was for us as much as he was for them, because he's our Nabi. Alayhi salatu wasalam. And how this is also proven wrong, how we know this is not right, and this is not what Rasulullah wanted from the Ummah, is the fact that when he sent Mu'adh radiallahu anh to Yemen, he said, teach them the Sunnah. How will you answer? The Quran. If you don't find it there, the Sunnah. Why is Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam sending him to Yemen and telling him to teach the Sunnah when those people are not Sahaba? That means your argument is broken. Because the Prophet is telling the Sahaba. In all the narrations where the Prophet said to the Sahaba, those that are present should convey to those that are absent. Why is he telling them to convey it to those that are absent if it isn't for them and only for the Sahaba? It's a silly argument. And the last argument they present is, okay, hadith is a thing, we're accepting that, but hadith are all just made up. You guys understand? The shuyukh just made up the hadith to, push their little mosques into existence, and they have their own little business here, and that sort of like weird, very lazy talk. I was going to say something else to describe the weird part, but then I stopped because we shouldn't. Right? That part there, that's the 1 hour discussion, by the way. That's the 1 hour discussion. Because if you are claiming that hadith is not preserved, we will prove with authority that it was preserved. But I'm not going to do that today, and I don't think that's something that we'll be doing in this class anyway. I will share a reference with you, though, if you want to read on this issue. I think one of the most authoritative works in English on this matter is Sheikh Muhammad Mustafa Azami, rahimahullah ta'ala's work on hadith. I forgot what it's called. One second, let me check. It's a famous one. Where's it gone? Resources, there it is. There it is. Studies in hadith methodology and literature. What is it called, folks? Yeah. This riwayah, this book, this book is worth being read word for word, line by line in a classroom setting. This book. It's a very good book. He passed away, rahimahullah, during COVID. One of the giants of our time, man. One of the greatest scholars of our time. This guy was the nightmare for Orientalists. I'm not lying to you, man. He passed away, rahimahullah. One of my biggest regrets in life is not meeting him. I tried, but his family members, towards the end of his life, they said he was too weak and was not taking visitors. He stopped taking visitors long before. But some of you may have met him, I don't know. Sheikh Mustafa Azmi, I'll say one thing about him, and we'll close with this. Do yourself a favor, go to Amazon, type his name in, buy every book that he ever wrote. There is not one that is subpar. There is not one that is even a hair's width under excellence, and that does not destroy Western academics and is not a sledgehammer against criticisms against our deen. People who claim that the Quran is made up and not authentic, man, you got to read his book. He has a book dedicated to the preservation of the Quran. It's harf akhir. After that, there's nothing. There's no objection left after that book, inshallah. He really goes to town on it. He's very good in writing and very, very analytical.